I love this scene to end the season because it brings us all back around to what this series was originally about, which is Alicent and Rhaenyra and their two experiences.
The sooner we accept that House of the Dragon is fan fiction, the world will know peace.
Don't be mad at the season finale, be mad at the entire season.
I was really naive thinking that my girls were going to get more screen time or at least something more to do this season.
The House of the Dragon finale was great, but mistakes were made.
With how the show ended, oh, I am so sick to my stomach and ill.
That we're giving. There's a connect the dots puzzle, and some of the lines are drawn, and we're kind of filling it in and adding color. And a lot of that color is admittedly our own.
I say this because Maegor, Daron, well now we have Daron, they changed their mind on him. Nettles, Alicent's age, non-negotiable.
George R.R. Martin has dropped this banger. I do not look forward to the other posts I need to write about everything that's gone wrong with House of the Dragon.
But you know the writers want to keep me unlikable, man. They want to keep my career derailed.
It turns out the original plan for the show was to have the Battle of the Gullet at the end of season 2, but they've changed it, or they were forced to change it.
Castle strongholds and political maneuvering, but at the end of the day, it comes down to these two women trying to figure it out.
Always be about framed around those two women.
The idea is that they never really wanted to get into this rivalry together, but they were driven there by the patriarchy, by the men in their lives.
However, these two women just don't have agency, like at all.
House of the Dragon Season 2 is without a doubt the most disappointing show of this year.
But when it comes to fans being divided, he says, well, I'm not sure that the fans were divided over Season 2. Deadlines say maybe just George R.R. Martin, and Blois replies, yes, maybe one fan was.
How House of the Dragon fell short of its promise lies not only in the departure from Fire and Blood, but in the showrunners Ryan Condon and Sarah Hess standing firmly behind their narrative revision. Season 2 struggled to deliver a story arc that both honored these changes and resonated with viewers, leaving the adaptation caught between its bold ambition and the expectation it failed to meet.
Power is a curious thing, my lord. Are you fond of riddles? 3 great men sit in a room, a king, a priest, and a rich man. Between them stands a common sellsword. Each great man bids the sellsword kill the other 2. Who lives, who dies? Power resides where men believe it resides. It's a trick, a shadow on the wall, and a very small man can cast a very large shadow.
Welcome back, Watchers Beyond the Wall. For those who are new, my name is Monica. On this channel, we explore the rich world of A Song of Ice and Fire, along with fantasy and science fiction stories that captivate us through lore, history, and incredible world building. From character analyzations and hidden symbolisms to deep dives into games, books, and television adaptations, nothing is off limits. This is a place for over-analyzing every detail, revisiting scenes and chapters countless of times, and uncovering the deeper meaning with stories we love. Together, we'll examine the choices of writers and the motivation of characters, and the subtle clues that often go unnoticed on your first watch or read. So without further ado, gather your thoughts, sharpen your theories, and prepare yourself for another rewatch. Introduction. What happens when one of the most brutal and morally ambiguous civil wars in modern fantasy is reshaped into an intimate character tragedy centered on personal relationship and patriarchal oppression?
The thing that Great Council should tell you is that this is a patriarchy and that the men of the realm want to keep the men in power.
Tomorrow, June 21st, House of the Dragon Season 3 premieres, and yet the discourse surrounding the series has only become increasingly more divided. Despite its immense production value and its foundation built upon the world of A Game of Thrones and Fire and Blood,
which is the bigger number, 5 or 1? 5. 5. 1. One army, a real army, united behind one leader with one purpose. Our purpose died with the Mad King.
the series has faced persistent criticism throughout its run. Most of these criticisms stem not from the performance, visual effects, or spectacle, but from the fundamental question regarding the adaptation itself and what story it ultimately wants to tell.
I resented you, I think, for caring so little for any of it, for knowing what you wanted. I did not know what I wanted.
Ryan Condell has reportedly described the emotional center of the story as the relationship between Alicent Hightower and Rhaenyra Targaryen. As Condell explained, "I've said from the beginning that Alicent and Rhaenyra are the two center characters of the show." He further emphasized that both women are products of a patriarchal system, shaped and manipulated by the determination of powerful men around them, particularly their fathers, King Viserys and Otto Hightower.
I've never seen that side of you, my daughter. I even doubted its existence.
It was an ugly thing, I regret it.
We play an ugly game. And now, for the first time, I see that you have the determination to win it.
However, what began as effective expansion gradually evolved into the center framework through which nearly every event in the Dance of the Dragons is interpreted. The problem is that the dance is not solely a story about patriarchy or two women being torn apart. At its core, it is a cautionary tale about dynastic greed and the self-destruction of power.
And so Queen Rhaenyra climbed the steps and seated herself on the Iron Throne. Legend has it that as she left the hall later, blood trickled down her legs and hands, proving the Iron Throne had spurned her. Nonsense. It's a chair made of steel blades. Rhaenyra had wanted it all her life and had sacrificed 2 sons for it. She likely gripped the damn thing too tight.
It chronicles how the most powerful family in Westeros turned against itself and nearly bringing the dragons to extinction in the process. The tragedy expands beyond kings and queens. One of the war's most devastating consequences is its impact on the realm itself and the countless small folk forced to suffer beneath the goals of nobles. Unfortunately, House of the Dragon has often struggled to communicate these wider consequences. One of the clearest examples comes during the coronation of Aegon II. When Rhaenys bursts from the floor of the dragon pit aboard Meleys, killing scores, if not hundreds, of civilians. Later in an interview discussing the sequence, Sarah Hess remarked, "It is Game of Thrones. Civilians don't count." For many viewers, this comment represented more than a poor phrased response. It felt fundamentally disconnected from the world building George R. R. Martin has represented. In Martin's story, civilians do count. The suffering of ordinary people in the background is not merely decoration. It is often the entire point. The strength of Martin's version of the dance lies in its complexity. Neither side emerges morally pure. Nearly every major player contributes to the destruction of House Targaryen through pride, vengeance, and fear. Yet the adaptation often narrows these motivations into a simpler framework, focused primarily on misogyny and patriarchal oppression.
They all swore obeisance to her. Our house among them.
That was before Aegon.
Rhaenyra would be a good queen.
It wouldn't matter if she were Aerys himself, born again. Rhaenyra is a woman.
While these themes unquestionably exist within Westeros, reducing the conflict to a story of a woman denied power by a man risks flattening a far richer and more unsettling narrative. This creative choice, placing the fractured relationship between two former friends and possibly former lovers at the emotional center of the dance, has ultimately become the defining identity of the series as a whole. But it has also created a chain reaction of narrative problems. In trying to preserve the tragedy of Alicent and Rhaenyra, the series frequently softens or rewrites major moments from the source material.
Alicent is at this point feeling very alone. She doesn't feel like she has a real partner in life, and that includes her father. She feels like her father has pushed her to the place she's in. and she can't hear her own voice. She can't feel her own heart beating. So when Rhaenyra enters, that's what she wants. She wants the love in her life, and it's a bit of a love story in a way of these two women.
Character agency is also diminished. Major escalations become misunderstandings or accidents. Timelines are compressed. Motivations are simplified, and morally uncomfortable choices are reshaped into more sympathetic ones. This issue becomes even more visible in a controversial adaptation choice such as the replacement of Nettles with Rhaenyra, the departure of Targaryen mysticism, and the tendency to prioritize emotional intimacy over complex politics. Game of Thrones famously stumbled in its final years after nearly a decade of production and 73 episodes. The creative fatigue arrived after years of storytelling. House of the Dragon, by contrast, sometimes feels as though it is experiencing the same exhaustion, but this comes after only 18 episodes. Across 5 years of writing, filming, and production, the series has delivered moments of brilliance, but also signs of a creative team struggling to balance adaptation with reinvention. As season 3 begins, a larger question hangs over the series. Can it course correct, or has the changes already created a butterfly effect beyond repair? What began as a promising collaboration between Martin and Condon increasingly feels like a case study in the tensions between source material and adaptation. And between all of this, where will the story go from here? Many viewers may ultimately be left asking the same question. What was all of this destruction actually for? Warning, this video is created for commentary, discussion, and entertainment purposes only. The statements, observations, and opinions expressed in this video are my own personal opinion and interpretation based off of publicly available information. Any claim, allegation, or discussion mentioned are alleged and should not be interpreted as confirmed fact unless officially verified by a credible source. I do not claim absolute accuracy and encourage viewers to conduct their own research and form their own conclusion. No defamatory intent is intended towards any individual, company, or party mentioned. Any copyrighted material used falls under fair use principle for purposes such as commentary, criticism, education, and discussion under applicable copyright law. Source material. Fire and Blood is presented as a fictional historical chronicle authored by Archmaester Gildane, documenting the reign of Targaryen kings and the political conflict that shaped their dynasty.
The dance of the dragons is the flowery name bestowed upon the savage internecine struggle for the Iron Throne of Westeros, fought between two rival branches of House Targaryen during the years 129 to 131 AC. There were two principal claimants to the Iron Throne upon the death of King Viserys I Targaryen, his daughter Rhaenyra, the only surviving child of his first marriage, and Aegon, his eldest son by his second wife.
Unlike George R. R. Martin's traditional novels, the text deliberately adopts the structure of a historical record, competing accounts from debating sources, letters, oral history, and the testimony of figures such as Septon Eustace and Mushroom. Because of this framing device, Fire and Blood often presents multiple versions of a single event, asking readers to dissect these testimonies and evaluate the certainty, in the same way historians evaluate historical evidence. On January 12, 2024, I published a video titled House of the Dragon versus Fire and Blood Breakdown, which was better, where I criticized HBO's adaptation from issues ranging from pacing and inconsistent character aging to major departure from Martin's source material. Although the video has since been made private, many responses repeated a similar sentiment, defending the changes, stating Fire and Blood is an unreliable and account-based and therefore should not be treated as legitimate source material for adaptation. This is also a defense repeatedly employed by showrunner Ryan Condon himself.
Look, again, that's the big challenge and also the fun of adapting a book like Fire and Blood, which is a history book. It is intentionally an outline of events that happen, and it's not a narrative where you're inside a character's head the way you are in a Song of Ice and Fire in the text of those pages.
Condon's interpretation of the relationship between House of the Dragon and Fire and Blood is relatively straightforward. The television series represents the true sequence of events, while Fire and Blood represents how the events will later be transcribed and ultimately distorted by history. Under this interpretation, historical narratives are inherently flawed because history is written by victors and shaped by social prejudices, including patriarchal biases that often portray women as unfavorable.
Living conversation with the text of Fire and Blood, and also history itself and how history is written, how women tend to be erased from histories like this. And does that mean that they didn't participate, or simply that what they did do wasn't captured in the historical record, or was it intentionally brushed over or minimized in the writing of the history?
The Iron Throne by rights must pass to His Grace's eldest true-born son. Nor will they spare my children, she declared. Aegon and his brothers are the king's true-born sons, with a better claim to the throne than her brood of bastards. Daemon will find some pretext to put them all to death, even Helena and her little ones. One of these strongs put out Aemon's eye, never forget. He was a boy, aye, but a boy is the father to the man, and bastards are monstrous by nature.
There is a certain truth in the idea that historical records can be biased. Historiography, as a discipline, has long recognized that history is not merely pulling from a vacuum. Political interest, cultural presumptions, religious beliefs, and social structures influence how events are recorded. Medieval chroniclers exaggerated kings' virtue. Roman historians wrote with political agendas, and many historical accounts marginalized women and treated them unfairly. Historians have spent centuries identifying and correcting these distortions. However, Condon's argument appears to go beyond acknowledging historical bias. At various points, he suggests historical text often lacks clear personal motivation because historians only possess dates, outcomes, and broader events rather than the insight into internal reasoning of historical figures.
When you read a book about Henry VIII is a historical figure. He's not a character. The historians are not trying to figure out the ins and outs of every little move that he makes and all the little nuances to justify and slowly arc over time why he's making all the choices that he's making and why he's doing the things that he's doing. Simply, they're there to render the history in as accurate a way as possible, and that's the way that Fire and Blood approaches it.
Under this logic, adaptation grants the freedom to create motivation where the source remains silent. The problem is that this misunderstands both the function of historical evidence and the work historians actually perform. Historians do not simply collect names and dates and list events. Their purpose is to reconnect human action by re-examining evidence and identifying patterns of motivation. Absolute certainty is never truly possible, but historical analyzation has never required certainty in order to establish likely intention. Instead, historians rely on primary and secondary source to build information interpretation. Primary source considers material created during the time period being studied: letters, speeches, diaries, legal records, memoirs, inscriptions, finance records, eyewitness accounts, and political degrees. Secondary source involve later analyzation by historians who empathize and interpret these materials. Historical understanding emerges between these two sets of evidence. Consider Augustus. Historians cannot enter his mind and observe his intimate and most private thoughts directly, and yet his motivations are not treated as unknowable mysteries. Following the assassination of his adopted father and great-uncle Julius Caesar in 44 BC, Octavian inherited Caesar's name, fortune, and political legitimacy.
Octavian's great-uncle Julius Caesar was murdered by members of the Roman Senate who opposed his attempts to reform the government. Taking command of Caesar's army, Octavian joined forces with Caesar's chief general, Mark Antony, and together their armies hunted down Caesar's assassin.
No serious historian argues that Augustus conquered Rome for an unknowable reason, simply because no diary existed documenting his every thought. The point is not that historians possess perfect certainty. The point is that historians are not helpless observers searching with these disconnected events. Motivation is not invisible. It is constructed through action, relationship, pattern, and surviving evidence. The process to interpret human interaction and ultimately their reasoning is fundamental to historiography. Applying this back to Fire and Blood raises an important discussion. While Martin's fictional history leaves room for interpretation considering private conversations or discrepancies within certain events, it does not leave every aspect of its character undefined. The text provides consistent character relationships, repetition within pattern and behavior, political loyalties, and identifiable personal desires.
He mocked Daemon for facing him alone. "You have lived too long, uncle." And Daemon replied, "On that much, we agree." Then the old prince climbed stiffly onto the back of his dragon Caraxes, but neglected to fasten the chains that secured Riker to Saturn.
Readers may debate what occurred behind closed doors, but the broader motivation and dynamics are often clearly illustrated. Changing names, ages, family structures, timelines, or even core relationships is not equivalent to filling in historical gaps. It is altering foundational material. Historians work with an incomplete historical chronicle. They do not invent new social relationships or rewrite an unestablished chronicle based off of imperfect evidence. This interpretation also misunderstands the role of source material in adaptation. A source's bias does not eliminate it as a source. It requires critical engagement. Historians do not discard biased texts simply because biases exist. Rather, they contextualize them, comparing them with other evidence and determining where reliability increases or decreases. The same principle applies to Fire and Blood. Critics often argue that because Gildane, Mushroom, and Septon Eustace presents contradictory accounts, the text becomes too ambiguous to adapt faithfully. Yet, this ignores a fundamental reality. House the Dragon depends entirely on Martin's work to exist. Fire and Blood is not supplementary material, it is the entire narrative and the canonical record upon which the adaptation was built on. The question was never fully if Fire and Blood contained bias. It unquestionably does. The question is whether acknowledging bias gives an adaptation ultimate authority to replace established motivation and character dynamics. Scholars across centuries suggest otherwise. Bias complicates evidence, it does not erase it. The cost of the war and Martin's core theme. The true message within the Dance of the Dragons is about a dynastic dispute between bloodline rivalry and the determination that clouds people's judgment. The conflict between this struggles not only through succession, but the rightful claim to the throne, and how beneath that lies something far deeper: pride, greed, and the desire for power.
"I've got 7 kingdoms to rule! 1 king, 7 kingdoms! Do you think honor keeps them in line? Do you think it's honor that's keeping the peace? It's fear! Fear and blood!"
Then we're no better than the Mad King.
Careful, Ned, careful now.
Once power becomes visible and obtainable, many individuals are willing to do anything to grasp their own control over it. What begins as a disagreement over inheritance transforms into a destructive war that consumes families, kingdoms, and innocent lives. Throughout the Dance of the Dragons, personal ambition repeatedly overweighs loyalty and reason. Members of both the Black and the Greens consider themselves and their actions justified, even whether or not those actions lead to destruction, instead of seeking out compromise or considering the greater good of the realm.
"Should have been you," the sea snake shouted at her grace. "Staunton sent to you, yet you left it to my wife to answer and forbade your sons to join her." For all the castle knew, the princes Jace and Joff had been eager to fly with Princess Rhaenys to Rook's Rest with their own dragons.
Leaders become focused on securing victory and proving their legitimacy. Their desire for control clouds their judgment, causing them to make decisions based off of fear, anger, and revenge rather than wisdom. This demonstrates how the pursuit of power can corrupt even those who believe their actions are noble. Another important message shown within the dance is that the war fought by rulers rarely affects the ruler alone. The people who suffer the greatest consequences are are often those with the least amount of influence over the conflict itself.
Lannister, Targaryen, Baratheon, Stark, Tyrell. They're all just bricks on a wheel. This one's on top, then that one's on top, and on it spins, crushing those on the ground.
It's a beautiful dream. Stopping the wheel. You're not the first person who's ever dreamt it.
I'm not going to stop the wheel. I'm going to break the wheel.
The individuals fighting for the throne are protected by castles, armies, and wealth. But ordinary civilians do not possess this same advantage. Farmers, merchants, families, and ordinary villagers become trapped within the destruction created by the people in power. Those lives are changed forever, despite having no voice in the conflict. Martin repeatedly shows the destruction that dragons bring to both armies and civilians. Dragons symbolize overwhelming power, but they also symbolize uncontrollable destruction. While they were originally viewed as a sign of strength and superiority, during the dance, they become an instrument of suffering and devastating entire populations. Towns are burned, communities are destroyed, and fear spreads throughout the realm. The very creatures that once elevated House Targaryen becomes one of the main causes of their downfall. This reinforces the idea that power without restraint eventually destroys the people who seek to control it.
On Dragonstone, Queen Rhaenyra collapsed when told of Luke's death. Luke's young brother Joffrey, Jace was still away on his mission north, swore a terrible oath of vengeance against Prince Aemond and Lord Boros. Only the intervention of the Sea Snake and Princess Rhaenys kept the boy from mounting his own dragon at once. Mushroom would have us believe he played a part as well. As the Black Council sat to consider how to strike back, a raven arrived from Harrenhal. An eye for an eye, a son for a son, Prince Daemon wrote. Lucerys shall be avenged.
The Dance of the Dragons also reflects the circle of vengeance and how hatred perpetuates violence. Every single death creates anger. Every action creates a resistance inspired by another. Instead of ending the conflict, vengeance continues it and deepens it. Characters become so consumed with defeating their enemy, they lose sight of the original purpose of the war. As a result, the struggle shifts from securing a throne to simply inflicting pain upon the opposite side. This illustrates how conflicts often evolve between their initial cause and become driven by emotions rather than reason. Ultimately, the Dance of the Dragons teaches the greatest cost of the war is not the loss of crowns or political power, but the suffering inflicted on ordinary people. Martin uses the conflict to show the internal motivation and rivals can blind individuals to the consequences of their own actions. While rulers fight for authority and legitimacy, innocent people are left to endure the destruction and loss. Throughout the dance, Martin conveys the war is born from pride and the pursuit of power, ultimately leaving everyone else devastated, even those who have achieved victory. Season 3 must fix what's broken. Following the divisive reception of Season 2, House of the Dragon enters Season 3 at a critical turning point in its narrative. The series now faces the challenge of balancing two competing expectations, correcting criticism surrounding pacing and agency while still remaining faithful to the larger tragedy of the Dance of Dragons.
And arrows and quarrels flew at Dreamfire wherever she went, at such close range that some few even punched through her scales. Whenever she lighted, men swarmed to the attack, driving her back into the air. Twice the dragon flew at the dragon pit's great bronze gates, only to find them closed and barred and defended by ranks of spears, strewn with charred corpses, and the very air was thick with smoke and the smell of burned flesh, yet still the spears and arrows flew. The end came when a crossbow bolt nicked one of the dragon's eyes. The storming of the dragon pit was done. 4 of the Targaryen dragons lay dead.
While some viewers criticize Season 2 for moving too slow or the lack of battles, others argue that the issue was not simply a lack of action, but rather a lack of momentum. Major characters often appeared trapped in a repetitive cycle of hesitation. Councils frequently serve as a vehicle for exposition rather than conflict, and the war itself felt as though it was standing still despite repeatedly being described as inevitable.
You must go before you are discovered. There's been a mistake. There's been no mistake. Please. You can prevent this, Alicent. A terrible war is looming, and even victory may be so bloody as to be counted a loss. Do not let your pride blind you. There's been no mistake.
This creates an important challenge for the season ahead. House of the Dragon cannot simply respond to criticism by increasing the number of battles or relying on larger spectacles. In Fire and Blood, the Dance of the Dragons was not merely a sequence of battle arrangements. It was a conflict built upon personal grievances, family structure, relationships, and the grandeur of a collapse of an institution meant to hold the realm together. The war mattered because of every decision carrying an emotional and political consequence beyond a battlefield. Based off of current leaks, rumors, production info, and fan speculation, Season 3 appears to deliver much of the large-scale warfare that many viewers expected earlier in the series.
Season 2 is really if not a Cold War, it was the March to War, and we're now literally seeing that at the end of the season. Whereas now the fuses have been lit, and Season 3 is going to start with a bang. I mean, it's going to there is no turning back now, which I hope is clear at the end of this. There is no more dithering and looking for peace. It is an all-out fight.
However, if several major events from Fire and Blood are compressed into a reduced episode count, the show risks creating the exact opposite problem it spent much of Season 2 struggling with. Speeding up the narrative now doesn't erase the consequences it created by slowing it down. In many ways, it only exposes them further. After an entire season criticized for stagnant pacing, repetitive character beats, and a protagonist hesitating to move the war forward, Ryan Condon and Sarah Hess confirm that House of the Dragon will conclude with only 4 seasons, placing the series in an increasingly difficult position. The story no longer has the luxury of restraint. The problem is that Fire and Blood is not merely a combination of isolated spectacles. It is a cascade of political intrigue, and with each battle, betrayal, and death, it fundamentally shifts the turning point of the conflict. Certain events must occur at specific moments in order for later development to feel earned.
Rhaenyra's youngest son seemed lost as well. In the confusion of battle, none of the survivors seemed quite certain which ship Prince Viserys had been on. Men on both sides presumed him dead, drowned, or burned, or butchered. And though his brother Aegon the Younger had fled and lived, all the joy had gone out of the boy. He would never forgive himself for leaping onto Stormcloud and abandoning his little brother to the enemy.
By delaying critical turning points in Season 2, the series has effectively narrowed itself into rushing material that required significant build-up. Battles will inevitably be shorter, character arcs condensed, and political fallout minimized, simply to reach a predetermined endpoint on time. Ironically, the show attempted to slow-cook the Dance of the Dragons, may end up making the later seasons feel rushed and mechanically plotted than it otherwise would have been if they followed the source material. What makes this particularly frustrating is that the series often behaves as though spectacle can compensate for missing narrative. Dragons, visual scale, and a beautiful battle sequence can temporarily distract audiences, but they cannot replace the connective tissue that binds these moments to emotional weight. A civil war only resonates with viewers when they understand the resentment, fear, and personal loyalties driving the narrative. Without this foundation, major deaths and battles risk feeling less like tragedies and more like checkpoints the writers are scrambling to hit before the clock runs out. The challenge then is no longer simply getting the story moving, but preserving the illusion that events are happening organically rather than being curated. Narrative momentum, timeline, and my prediction. After the mixed reception of Season 2 of House of the Dragon, Season 3 faces the difficult task of not only improving the series. If Season 3 attempts to course correct with major battle sequences in only 8 episodes, the series risks overcorrecting, trading Season 2's stagnation for rushed pacing, sacrificing the emotional and political depth. This aligns with Ryan Condon's view of the story. He argues that the first half of the narrative in Season 1 is mostly prologue, while the later half of the season is the main story, and Season 2 is supposed to represent medieval warfare, how allies join the fight and armies begin to march, but it is a slow combination of events. The problem with this is before the Dance of the Dragons truly kicked off, the death of Luke was the turning point in the dance. This did happen, but after the death of Luke, it pretty much stopped it in its entirety, and the dragons danced.
It comes down to who do you think that point of no return is for? So if it's for Alicent and Rhaenyra, I think there's actually still hope, even with Luke's death. The problem moving forward is that it's only so much in Alicent and Rhaenyra's control anymore.
Yeah. House of the Dragon fundamentally altered the shift, and we can feel the impact even as late as Season 3. If Season 3 suddenly shifts into full-on war in such a short amount of time frame, the timeline risks feeling compressed rather than natural. Consider the early seasons of Game of Thrones. Season 4, all the way up until Season 6, didn't feature that many large-scale spectacles. Large-scale battles were usually very rare. Viewers did not solely turn in for action sequences. Instead, audiences were invested in political intrigue, character motivations, dialogue, and the larger mystery around the world. The dragons, White Walkers, and battle elements only existed alongside interpersonal conflicts for a larger story. Season 3 will continue relying heavily on the emotional foundation created between Rhaenyra and Alicent in Season 1.
Why have you come here? Aemon will soon fly to join Cole in the Riverlands. When he's gone, Helena as queen will be the crown's authority. If you come then to King's Landing, I will see to it that our guards throw down their arms. We will open the gates. We will shed no blood. You will enter as a conqueror.
Unlike the relationship in Fire and Blood, where there was never a youthful friendship of the type depicted, House of the Dragon made their bond central to the narrative. Although this becomes slightly more confusing when examining how this season is being marketed. Unlike previous seasons, which heavily focus on both Rhaenyra and Alicent in promotional material, this time only Rhaenyra has received a major character poster, with other posters coming out later. Similarly, the Entertainment Weekly photo shoot focused primarily on Emma Darcy, Tonklin Carney, and Ian Mitchell, rather than emphasizing the Rhaenyra-Alicent dynamic they had previously defined in the first 2 seasons. While this could suggest a shift in narrative focus, it seems unlikely that the series would completely abandon this sensual relationship between Rhaenyra and Alicent after structuring the entire story around their conflict for 2 consecutive seasons. The return of the Weirwood set in King's Landing further emphasizes the show's intended direction to revisit the emotional symbolism of their early relationship.
And burnt her own fleet of Sunspear to show her people that they were finished running.
What are you doing?
So you remember?
If the scepter sees this book, then the scepter. Rhaenyra!
The series has repeatedly emphasized personal history over political intrigue time and time again. Season 3, Episode 1 will likely open with Rhaenyra feeling optimistic about the terms she and Alicent agreed upon. She may believe that she's going to win the war without bloodshed. This would align with the characterization depicted in Season 1, particularly Episode 8, where Rhaenyra repeatedly expresses her reluctance towards a devastating war. Throughout the series, she is framed as somebody attempting to avoid becoming another ruler who gains power through widespread destruction.
I had thought the mere fact of you might stay the enemy's hand. But Lord Corlys is right. We must strike while we have the advantage. And end this war. Learn your beasts and your commands. You will fly in 2 days' time. The strongholds of the usurper, Old Town and Lannisport, and their armies, all must be subdued. Alone without allies, you will have no choice but to surrender. You wish for us to kill innocents?
The central conflict for Episode 1 will be the Battle of the Gullet. In the book, Jace takes an active role in response to the Triarchy's attack because his younger brother, Aegon, and Viserys are on board ships that are headed to Pentos for safety. Upon learning that they are in danger, he participates in the battle with the Dragon Seeds. Jace ultimately dies fighting during the chaos of the Battle of the Gullet, while Vermax becomes entangled with a ship and is ultimately brought down. The show, however, creates several complications in adapting this story directly. In the source material, Aegon escapes by mounting his dragon, Stormcloud, while Viserys is captured. The issue is that in House of the Dragon, both Aegon and Viserys are still toddlers, making the sequence much more difficult to portray in the same way.
The tale reached Dragonstone only when Prince Aegon arrived, desperately clinging to the neck of his dragon Stormcloud. The boy was white with terror, Mushroom tells us, shaking like a leaf and stinking of piss. Only 9, he had never flown before, and would never fly again, for Stormcloud had been terribly wounded as he fled Big Abandon, arriving with the stubs of countless arrows embedded in his belly, and a scorpion bolt through his neck. He died within the hour, hissing as the hot blood gushed, black and smoking from his wounds.
Because of this, the show may shift certain elements of Aegon's role onto Joffrey. Joffrey primarily taking Aegon's place in the story would also create higher stakes, as it raises the possibility that he may not survive during the battle. In the books, Joffrey dies much later, around 13 or 14, when he attempts to ride Syrax during the storming of the dragon pit in the effort to save the dragons trapped by the shepherd's mob. However, the show version of Joffrey is significantly younger, and I'm not convinced the series will fully adapt the storming of the dragon pit in the same way as the source material. That leaves and raises a very important question. If the show changes or removes elements of Joffrey's storyline, then how will he meet his end? This theory also creates another major question surrounding Aegon and Viserys. If Joffrey inherits parts of Aegon's narrative and the role that he plays in the Battle of the Gullet, then how will the show explain what happened to the younger brothers, and how will their story eventually unfold? Ultimately, there has to be a reason for Jace to participate in the battle, and by diminishing that, it will look like an act of desperation rather than an act to save his brother. Episode 2 will most likely deal with the immediate aftermath of the Battle of the Gullet and the emotional consequence surrounding Jace's death. In Fire and Blood, Rhaenyra's losses throughout the dance repeatedly harden her, pushing her towards paranoia and suspicion. Following the death of her children and allies, she increasingly struggles with trust and those around her.
The Queen would have none of it, however. Only the gods truly know the hearts of men, and women are full as strange. Broken by the loss of one son, Rhaenyra Targaryen seemed to find new strength after the loss of a second. Jace's death hardened her, burning away her fears, leaving only her anger and her hatred. Still possessed of more dragons than her half-brother, her grace now resolved to use them, no matter the cost. She would rain down fire and death upon Aegon and all those who supported him, she told the Black Council, and either tear him from the Iron Throne or die in the attempt.
Because of this, I would not be surprised if some direct anger goes towards her council, believing they undermined her authority and failed to protect Jace. I also think that some of this blame will be put on Baela. The reason I mention this is because of an unsettling still image we have received. Rhaenyra and King's Landing grabbing Baela's face.
My enemies have been allowed to muster their strength.
Eventually, news of Jace's death will reach Aemon and Alicent. Alicent may convince Aemon to move against Harrenhal and Daemon. Leaks also suggest that episode 2 may contain the Red Fork and the Fish Feeds, with Jason Lannister's head being delivered to Daemon. In Fire and Blood, these battles are important because they represent the collapse of the Green military movement in the Riverlands. The Fish Feeds especially become one of the bloodiest battles in the war, ending in a majority Black victory and serving to weaken the Green forces. However, I do not think these battles will be as depicted as a large-scale cinematic sequence comparable to the Battle of the Bastards or the expected scale of the Battle of the Gullet. Considering the number of battles we are reportedly planned to get this season, it seems more likely that the conflict will be condensed. Early seasons of Game of Thrones frequently handled Robb Stark's victories this way, focusing on the aftermath and consequence rather than a full-scale production. I can easily see the show opening on the beginning of a battle, cutting away, and us seeing the conclusion. Sarah Hess is also writing episodes 2 and 3, including the highly anticipated conceptual episode that has been teased by the creative team. I lean towards the idea that episode 3 will be the experimental one. It will open with the taking of King's Landing, a massive event featuring several action sequences. Rhaenyra and Daemon's relationship will appear repaired for the most part, but Sarah Hess has already confirmed that they are not fully healed.
And I think it gives him the confidence in himself to go, I serve you and I'm yours.
And it's not that everything's been resolved, but Daemon realizes that his job is to facilitate Rhaenyra getting to the throne, and that he understands now that Viserys wasn't trying to punish him, and so he's able to let go of his anger at Rhaenyra.
However, the narrative may shift towards the conceptual episode as it has been teased. There is many fan speculation online of what this episode may involve. Some theorists suggest a sequence of Helena's visions, others say material we haven't seen before with the Green Men, Children of the Forest, Green Seers, or a deeper connection to the Song of Ice and Fire prophecy. We already know that the Green Men are expected to make an appearance at some point, and their inclusion is significant because of the mysterious order associated with the Isle of Faces and the ancient magic tying back to the first men. But if they are not tied to the conceptual episode, then questions are often raised. Where do they fit into the story at all? Ryan Condon has already described the episode written by Hess as conceptual, deeply introspective, and outside of the show's traditional narrative. While its format is said to be highly unconventional and character-driven, the show's creative team has deliberately kept details around the episode hidden. At this point, we do not know the full length of the episode, and the plot around it is largely unknown. Episode 4 of Season 3 is reportedly being directed by Claire Kilner, who is also directing episodes 2 and 3. Based on leaks surfacing, Darren's storyline is one of the most confusing elements to me regarding the direction that the show may take. The biggest issue begins with how the series handles Darren from the start. In Season 1, there is nearly no reference of his existence, and the scenes they did mention Darren in were cut. Ultimately, Aegon and Aemon and Helena are the only siblings that are featured physically throughout the entire series run. Season 2 acknowledges him only briefly through dialogue confirming that he was in Old Town.
My son Darren. What's he like?
Does he not write to you?
Less and less these days.
10 and 6 now. Letters perhaps hold less of his interest.
But the show still does not cast an actor or establish any actual motivation for his story. Because of this, the audience has little reason to have an emotional interest in him. Now, the leak suggests that Season 3 will introduce two Darrens, a false Darren and a real Darren. One leak alleges that Ormond Hightower will hand fake Darren to Daemon Targaryen. However, if this leak turns out to be true, it creates several problems in the narrative. Most obvious, how does Daemon not know what his own nephew looks like? I do believe that several battles, such as Honeywine, the Red Kraken's campaign, and Butcher's Ball, will largely take place off-screen. While this is understandable for a production point of view, it is still disappointing because of Darren's introduction at Honeywine is one of the most pivotal moments in his character development and a turning point for the movement of the Green Forces. In the source material, the Battle of Honeywine initially appears lost to the Greens. Lord Ormond Hightower's army begins collapsing under pressure and defeat. It seems almost inevitable for them to lose. Then Darren arrived riding to Serion. Just then, a great shadow swept across the battlefield. Darren arrived, completely changing the course of the battle. Serion attacked enemy forces and transformed what looked like a sure defeat into a clear, decisive win for Aegon. This moment is important because Honeywine establishes Darren as more than another Targaryen princeling. Unlike Aemon, who is associated with fear and destruction.
When Aemond realized that his arrogance had cost him capital, he mounted Vhagar in a black rage and rained fire onto every village and castle he suspected of disloyalty. Abandoned by Aemond, Sir Criston marched the royal army back to King's Landing, intent on recapturing the city himself. Instead, he was trapped and cut to pieces by the Riverlords, who had sworn to support Rhaenyra's claim.
Darren gains the reputation of courage through the title Darren the Daring. It is one of the most pivotal roles in Darren's story arc. Minimizing Honeywine risks weakening his entire arc because much of his later reputation depends on this victory. The problem is that Season 3 is reportedly the second to last season. If the show has delayed Darren's introduction for this long, there may not be enough time left to fully develop him in the same way as the source material. material. This could also explain why some battles will be condensed or be off-screen. Based on leaks, Butcher's Ball is expected to occur around episode 6, directed by Lonnie Peristier. If the series follows Fire and Blood, this will likely be where Sir Criston Cole dies. In the source material, Sir Criston intentionally meets an unglamorous end. Rather than dying with a rigorous duel or a heroic last standing, he is killed before any performances could be fought. I'll have no songs about how brave you died, Kingmaker. His death is important because it reframes one of the dance's reoccurring themes. War does not always grant you legendary endings. Other major deaths that could occur in Season 3 is the death of Helaena Targaryen and possibly Otto Hightower. Helena's death becomes one of the most devastating acts in Fire and Blood, not only because of her popularity amongst the small folk, but because of the lasting consequences it attributes to the unrest in King's Landing, the eventual collapse of Rhaenyra's position.
Maesters may argue about the truth of such assertions, but on that fateful night a darker tale was being told in the streets and alleys of King's Landing, in inns and brothels and pot shops, even holy septs. Queen Helaena had been murdered, the whispers went, as her sons had been before her. Prince Darren and his dragons would soon be at the gates.
Rhaenyra's character arc in the show is increasingly appearing to move towards the idea that she is not simply the rightful heir because her father named her as his chosen successor. Instead, the show seems to reframe her beyond this larger idea that she is the chosen one, chosen by the gods. More specifically, her story may become centered on the idea that she believes the gods or fate have selected her because it is connected to the prince that is promised prophecy.
But I cannot gainsay that which the gods have laid before me.
Arguably, this has been foreshadowed since Season 1. In Season 1, young Rhaenyra encounters the White Stag. The White Stag symbolism is that the gods have put their blessing upon the rightful claimant. Season 3 continues with this similar pattern. Rhaenyra says that the dragon seeds are less than a political maneuver and more of a spiritual blessing. Based off of these large deviations, I also believe that Alicent's story arc will dramatically shift as well. I do believe that she will be going to Harrenhal in Season 3, which raises larger, significant questions on the departure from Fire and Blood. In the source material, Alicent never leaves King's Landing during the dance and plays no active war within the Riverlands campaign. However, after the events of Season 2, particularly her secret meeting with Rhaenyra and her willingness to undermine the Team Green cause, the show has effectively moved her beyond her original storyline. One possibility is that the writers intend to adapt elements of Sabitha Frey's role through Alicent's narrative. In Fire and Blood, Sabitha becomes a staunch supporter of Rhaenyra and spends considerable time at Harrenhal helping the war efforts for Team Black. Giving Alicent a similar function would allow the series to keep her involved in the overall central narrative.
King Aegon II would soon stand naked before his enemies, all of the king's men knew. Bloody Ben Blackwood, Kermit Tully, Sabitha Frey, and their brothers in victory were preparing to resume their advance upon the city, and only a few days behind them came Lord Cregan Stark and his Northmen. The Braavosi fleet, carrying the Arryn host, had departed Gulltown and was sailing toward the Gullet, where only young Alan Velaryon stood in its way, and the loyalty of Driftmark could not be relied upon.
But it also further disconnects her from her book counterpart. It also reduces a major historical character within the source material. The alternative is that Harrenhal serves as the setting for an entirely original storyline, centered on Alicent's guilt, self-reflection, and search for redemption, given that the shows increasingly focus on her personal relationship with Rhaenyra and her growing disillusionment of the war.
Aemond is the next in line. It is the order of things.
You know what he is. What he has somehow become. Has your loyalty faded, or does it flourish only at night and flee the sunrise like a moth?
What I saw at Rook's Rest.
What? What did you see?
Harrenhal could become a continuation of the introspective vision storytelling that we saw with Daemon. While this is an interesting approach for Alicent's story arc and will give her meaningful screen time, it also reinforces criticism that the adaptation focuses on character drama and invents certain plot lines instead of pertaining to the source material. There were also early rumors and leaks suggesting that this season could feature flashbacks of young Alicent and Gwen returning to court in King's Landing, possibly even featuring young Alicent from season 1. The Battle of Tumbleton will likely serve as the season finale of season 3. If the leaks are accurate, this could position Daemon Targaryen, Hugh Hammer, and the Dragon Seeds as central figures in the war. However, this marks a significant departure from Fire and Blood. In the source material, Daemon does not participate in either the first or second Battle of Tumbleton. During this period, he remains in the Riverlands alongside Caraxes and Nettles, forcing enemies and tracking down Aemon Targaryen. With Nettles seemingly removed from the adaptation, the series now has to fundamentally restructure Daemon's storyline and determine how he will be occupying his time during this phase of the war.
Rhaenyra now mistrusted all the dragon seeds, including the girl who rode with her husband Daemon, hunting Aemon in the Riverlands. She ordered the girl's head be sent to her, but there was a complication. As well as her dragon, the girl had taken to riding Daemon. When Daemon received the queen's order, he proclaimed it a queen's words and a whore's work. He sent the girl away at dawn, watching her and her dragon vanish into the morning mists.
This change carries a larger narrative question. If Tumbleton serves as the season finale, what will be the cliffhanger strong enough to carry us into the next season? Season 2 significantly altered audiences' expectations, not simply because viewers needed a large-scale battle sequence to carry momentum into the next season, as the showrunner often suggests, but because it failed to deliver the kind of impact and narrative cliffhanger that Game of Thrones is known for. One of George R. R. Martin's greatest strengths is his ability to leave a book within multiple emotional beats and shocking narrative twists. In Game of Thrones Season 1, audiences were led to believe Ned Stark was our central protagonist. Once he was executed, we were reeling from that. And then the season ended with the rebirth of dragons into the world. These cliffhangers worked because they fundamentally reshaped the audience's understanding of the story itself. Season 1 of House of the Dragon managed to replicate this structure effectively. The Green Council usurped Rhaenyra's throne, completely altering the political landscape.
Aegon has been crowned as his successor. They crowned him.
How did Viserys die?
I could not say.
How long ago?
A day passed, perhaps two. I was made a prisoner in my quarters while the Queen made her preparations.
Viserys has been slain.
Alicent demanded you declare for Aegon.
While House Velaryon's death served as a political and emotional weight beginning the war, but Season 2 somehow completely retconned this in the early episodes, slowing down the war's progression and not speeding it up. With that being said, there are rumors and leaks placing Ian Mitchell at the same filming location of Tumbleton, suggesting a potential scene between Aemon and Daemon or foreshadowing the God's Eye. Those are all my predictions for Season 3 as of now. There are possibly things that I have forgotten or that I failed to mention, so my apologies. I also want to note that I wrote this script before the final trailer and tried my best to keep it based off of what I believe is going to happen and not what the trailers are suggesting. Character motivation needs greater clarification. While the series excels in visual spectacle and political intrigue, its character development often falters, marred by inconsistency and a displacement within narrative. Across Season 1 and 2, characters exhibit contradictory motivations, abrupt behavior shifts, and underdeveloped arcs that undermine the show's own established established logic, arguing that House of the Dragon stumbles to maintain consistent character trajectories, weakening the emotional and cinematic weight of the series as a whole. Organized by main characters, the analysis shows through both seasons that the writers themselves seemingly have no idea where their character is headed. Rhaenyra Targaryen, from defiant heir to resistant monarch. Rhaenyra Targaryen's arc as the desired heir to the throne is supposed to be the emotional and political backbone of House of the Dragon, yet the show consistently strips her of meaningful agency, rather than allowing Rhaenyra to openly desire power, ambition, and political agency. Ryan Condon and Sarah Hess repeatedly frame her as a morally superior figure.
I thought I wanted it. But the burden is a heavy one. It's too heavy.
Her as morally restrained, reluctant, and uniquely virtuous compared to the men around her. In doing so, the show weakens one of her most compelling aspects within her character in Fire and Blood, the fact that she genuinely wanted the throne and believed it belonged to her. Instead of grounding Rhaenyra's claim in personal conviction, political legitimacy, or dynastic determination, the adaptation increasingly frames her story around the prophecy and divine purpose. Her motivations belong less to her own desire and more about fulfilling Viserys' belief in Aegon's dream and the larger prince that is promised prophecy.
Are you not angry?
Well, I should declare war because I'm angry.
No, because it's your duty as queen to crush rebellion.
You know my oath reaches beyond our personal ambitions. A song of ice and fire. The coming war against the darkness in the north, a conqueror's dream.
The problem is that this shift unintentionally removes responsibility and personal drive from her character. Rhaenyra no longer fights because she wants to rule, or because she believes she is politically entitled to rule. She fights because destiny allegedly requires her to do so. At the same time, the writers repeatedly undermine even this prophetic arc by positioning Rhaenyra in the endless cycle of hesitation. Throughout Season 2, she continuously resists the idea and reality of war, despite the conflict already being fully underway. In Season 2, Episode 8, she still speaks as though peace is realistically attainable, even after calling her banners and preparing for a military conflict.
Prince Daemon has Caraxes.
Cole will look to increase his numbers, and he may call upon a dragon of his own.
This is why you must act now, Your Grace. Loose the dragons, root Cole out, and burn him.
I have heard your arguments, and will consider them.
The series often frames this hesitation as a moral wisdom, but in reality, it creates dramatic stagnation. Rhaenyra behaves less like a claimant fighting for survival and more of somebody waiting out the war to resolve itself around her. The problem begins early on in Season 1, Episode 10, when Rhaenyra still spends much of this episode contemplating surrender and the terms proposed by Team Green. On the other hand, a lot of the war efforts are pushed onto the men and not Rhaenyra. By Season 2, this issue becomes increasingly more difficult to justify. She's lost a son, watched the Greens crown Aegon in open defiance of her claim, and now she has lost Rhaenys, one of her most loyal and powerful supporters. Under this scrutiny, one would think and expect her motivation, anger, and desire for her throne would be heavier now more than ever. Instead, the writers continuously emphasize caution and restraint to the point that it paralyzes her character progression.
But Vhagar is depleted after such a hard-fought battle.
If Aegon is dead, we will soon know it. 'Twould be a victory in name only. They will soon prop up another in its stead.
The time is ripe. If we can strike King's Landing before that dragon is recovered.
Then I myself must do it.
My queen, you are the crown. It is out of the question.
What would you have me do?
Ironically, this approach may stem from the show's broader discomfort with portraying women as politically ambitious without moral justification. Male characters in the series are routinely displayed with open states of power. Daemon seeks glory and legacy, Otto Hightower pursues political dominance, Aemon desires vengeance and military prowess, yet Rhaenyra's aspiration is considerably softened, redirected, or exasperated through the prophecy, motherhood, or or duty. The show seems hesitant to allow her to want power on her own terms. Going into season 3, this issue may increase and intensify. Season 2 increasingly suggested that Rhaenyra now views herself as chosen by fate itself.
Sesir boni dao.
Vasir? Jaihosa, ponte luviledis.
Ao ponte aolo vileda. Chadrizesi voskisi isi. Uepo Valirio sete non toligio keso vihot montasmo isi. Polaro timtritis nin kiapot mentani sosi daor. Il voletir vaquejot rakilos daor.
Whether she believes she is the prince that is promised, a divine selected ruler, or simply favored by prophecy remains ambiguous, but the direction is clear. The series is moving her away from political realism and further into messianic symbolism. The danger is that it risks transforming Rhaenyra from a flawed and ambiguous claimant into a passionate figure guided by the pursuit of religious zealot.
I am Paul Muad'Dib Atreides, Duke of Arrakis. Erudi dina esidani, Melisanan gai, Rui dimenaru, Ashini, Listen Algai.
Daemon Targaryen, loyal black or rogue usurper. Daemon Targaryen is one of the clearest examples of House of the Dragon struggling between its own interpretation of what the character is and the pre-established version in Fire and Blood. The series repeatedly places Daemon in conflict with himself because the writers cannot seem to decide whether he is a fundamentally power-hungry antagonist, a morally gray anti-hero, or Rhaenyra's most loyal supporter. As a result, his characterization between season 1 to season 2 often feels less like progression and more like narrative regression. Much of Daemon's Harrenhal storyline in season 2 is framed as a redemption arc.
Do you now plan to make your own claim? Perhaps to prove yourself to her?
Do not try me with your insolence, witch.
It's a hard thing, I imagine, to give obeisance to one who replaced you as heir. And a woman too, a girl child you bounced on your knee. I mean, does it please you that her legitimacy is contested as you stand here with a castle and a dragon, attempting to draw an army of men?
Yet, that leaves major structuring problems. The audience ends up exactly in the same place they left him at the end of season 1, deepening his loyalty to Rhaenyra. Instead of evolving the character, the show spends time disassembling dynamics they already established, only to rebuild them again in the finale. The core issue stems from the writer's apparent misunderstanding of Daemon's passion. Brian Condon and the creative team have reportedly suggested in interviews that Daemon's motivations are just undefined and unclear, particularly in season 1. Yet, in their attempt to clarify him in season 2, the series ironically moves him further away from what made Daemon so compelling in the first place.
Daemon's a complicated guy, but he's not a monster. I mean, this is his family. He does love his family. He particularly loves Rhaenyra. And look, his brother is shattered, and I think he feels for them.
Daemon was never meant to be wholly heroic or wholly villainous. His appeal in Fire and Blood comes from the tension and duality of his brutal nature and his loyalty. He is impulsive, violent, arrogant, and dangerous, but he is also a staunch supporter of House Targaryen and their customs, traditions, and belief systems. The loyalty is visible throughout season 1. His murder of Jaime Velaryon, his role in staging Laenor's death, and his reckless behavior when it comes to politics. It all stems from his loyalty and dependence on Rhaenyra. By episode 10, the Black Queen of season 1, Daemon kneels, pledging his loyalty to Rhaenyra. Season 2, however, abruptly destabilizes this foundation. The show suddenly reframes Daemon as though he secretly desired the throne for himself, creating internal conflict that feels manufactured rather than organic. This completely retcons their logic that they established in season 1. This man was such a staunch supporter to Rhaenyra's claims that he helped legitimize her bastard sons and didn't even preserve his children's legitimacy for the throne. Instead of building upon this established loyalty, the show spends much of season 2 questioning it. This shift makes Harrenhal visions feel less like meaningful introspections and more like an elaborate attempt to justify a redemption arc that the character did not need.
If only you'd been born first. My favorite son.
The confusion surrounding Daemon's character becomes even more apparent when examining the deleted scenes from season 1. These scenes are important because they reveal the inconsistency that the writers had while writing and fleshing out Daemon's story arc. Daemon tells Rhaenyra, "You are a Targaryen, the heir to the Iron Throne. The simple truth is this: you can do whatever you want." In the aired version of King of the Narrow Sea, they emphasize fully on the manipulation of Daemon within the brothel sequence, overshadowing his role both as a mentor and ideological influence. And yet, this deleted scene directly parallels Daemon's Harrenhal vision in season 2, where young Rhaenyra tells him, "You put me on that throne, and you love me, and you hate me for it. You created me, Daemon, yet you are now set on destroying me."
Stop.
Without the earlier context, however, the vision seems overly mystical and not grounded in emotional depth. Another deleted scene in episode 10 further emphasizes this disconnect. When Rhaenyra spirals over prophecies and omens, Daemon dismisses her fears outright, telling her ill luck does not make an omen. Sometimes it is just ill luck. He emphasizes and pushes her towards action, insisting she must call her bannermen, and lead men will come if she calls. The scene reinforces Daemon's position as an ally to Rhaenyra's cause, completely undermining and rewriting this context for season 2. The reason why I emphasize this is because even the writers themselves don't know where Daemon is headed. Why write a loyal character in one episode but completely change it in the next? Daemon's characterization within House of the Dragon is completely and totally erratic compared to his book counterpart. There is no set direction Daemon is going within House of the Dragon, and it becomes increasingly frustrating. I do believe in season 3 they will continue this pattern. Daemon and Rhaenyra are not fully mended, and the relationship still has cracks. Alicent Hightower, a contradictory moral compass. Alicent Hightower's character suffers from some of the most notable inconsistencies in House of the Dragon. Rather than developing naturally over emotional character beats and political staging, Alicent often feels rewritten from episode to episode depending on what the plot requires of her in that moment. The result is a character caught between multiple conflicting portrayals: the dutiful queen, the ambitious political operator, the morally righteous mother, and the remorseful peacemaker.
If Rhaenyra comes into power, your very life could be forfeit. Aemon's as well. She could move to cut off any challenge to her succession.
Then I won't.
You are the challenge! You are the challenge, Aegon! Simply by living and breathing!
Instead of these traits complementing one another, the series frequently presents them as impulsive and caught between indecision. In earlier episodes of season 1, Alicent is framed primarily as Rhaenyra's sympathetic and politically trapped friend. She is submissive to her father, uncomfortable when it comes to court politics, and clearly overwhelmed by her role as Viserys' young queen.
I'm being serious. I never just about cake. You aren't worried about your position?
I know those men and how they plot in their secret councils when I've been sent away.
You cannot worry at the matters of lords and kings, Rhaenyra.
However, by episode 5, we light the way the famous green dress emerges, radically shifting her character. The scene is staged as a declaration of political war, a public alliance with House Hightower, and a rejection to Rhaenyra's claim. Alicent suddenly adorns the position of somebody fighting for Aegon's claimant. Alicent's characterization being undermined can be seen mostly after the time jump, when she is portrayed as significantly harsher and more antagonistic to Rhaenyra. One of the clearest examples I can offer is when Alicent demands Rhaenyra to bring her newborn son to her. The scene emphasizes Alicent's willingness to wield her authority as a means of humiliation, deepening her resentment towards Rhaenyra and how contentious it has grown. The shift is further emphasized through the repeated conversations with Viserys in which she questions the legitimacy of Rhaenyra's children and pressures him to acknowledge that they are bastards.
It's a wonder to me their eggs ever hatched. To have one child like that is a mistake. To have three is an insult. To the throne, to you. To marry my only daughter to one of her flame-featured sons.
Together, these moments establish Alicent as a far more politically calculating and confrontational figure, making the later attempts to reframe her as a reluctant participant in the conflict feels increasingly inconsistent with the character the series had chosen to portray. The problem is that the show never fully commits to either version of Alicent. By episode 7, after Aemon loses his eye, Alicent becomes overly vicious and vengeful. Her demand of Lucerys' eye in return, combined with the physical attack on Rhaenyra, portrays a woman driven by rage. It is arguably one of the clearest moments in the entire series where Alicent actually acts with complete emotional certainty. She believes that her children are under threat, and her willingness to abandon decorum to defend them is evident. But by episode 9, the Green Council, much of this intensity has abruptly dissolved. Alicent suddenly opposes harsher action against Rhaenyra and frames herself as a morally distant to Otto's ruthlessness.
Let ravens be sent to our allies, Riverrun and Highgarden.
Am I to understand that members of the small council have been planning secretly to install my son without me?
My queen, there was no need to sully you with darkling schemes.
The issue is not that Alicent shows mercy. Complex characters should contain contradictions, but the transition lacks sufficient narrative groundwork. Only 2 episodes earlier, she was prepared to mutilate a child in retaliation of her son's injury. Yet, the series quickly pivots her into a reluctant participant, horrified by the consequences of the coup she actively helped create. Season 2 increases these contradictions even further. Her relationship with Sir Criston Cole is perhaps one of the clearest examples. In Season 1, Alicent is framed as a woman deeply bound by religion and duty, and sexual provocation would be frowned upon within the faith of the Seven. Much of her resentment towards Rhaenyra stems from her belief that Rhaenyra can act freely, while Alicent has to sacrifice her own desires for obligation and honor. Introducing a secret sexual relationship with Sir Criston Cole could have been compelling if the series had explored Alicent's loneliness, hypocrisy, and emotional unraveling. Instead of a relationship with Alicent and Sir Criston Cole happening organically, they reframe the relationship as a parallel to Rhaenyra. Her arc surrounding her children becomes even more confusing and inconsistent. Throughout Season 1, Alicent's center motivation is to protect Aegon, Aemon, and Helaena. Every political choice she makes is beyond the belief that when Rhaenyra comes to power to secure her claim to the throne, she would have to put Alicent's kids to the sword. However, this justification only stretches beyond a few dialogue scenes and ultimately gets undermined by the patriarchy.
I was raised to believe there was an order to things, that there was security in following the path laid out for us. I resented you, I think, for caring so little for any of it, for knowing what you wanted. I did not know what I wanted.
And the only real reason Aegon is crowned as king is because Rhaenyra is a woman. And the other justification for Alicent supporting Aegon is because she misunderstood Viserys' last dying words. Yet, by Season 2, Episode 8, Alicent appears fully willing to sacrifice Aegon entirely if it means to preserve her own survival. This doesn't seem ultimately calculating, but rather a way to put both main characters in a room to have another conversation about where they've been the last couple of days. The same woman who spent decades undermining Rhaenyra's position to secure her son's claim distanced herself from the very cause she was defined by. Instead of feeling transformative or a tragedy, the shift feels abrupt and indecisive. Deleted scenes from Season 1 make it very obvious how the writers themselves seemed uncertain about Alicent's core motivations. One deleted scene in Episode 9 shows how unwavering she is. In it, Alicent explicitly rejects Viserys' style of rule, calling him weak and indecisive. She declares that Aegon should rule like Aegon the Conqueror, wielding Blackfire as a symbol of Targaryen strength. His father was weak, weak. My husband was a good man and a kind one, but a wavering ruler riddled with indecision. His legacy inspires no one. My son will take the crown of his namesake, the conquerors. This scene presents Alicent not only as a reluctant participant in the coup, but as somebody who genuinely desires political upheaval. She wants power, strength, and legacy through her son. But later on in season 2, they retcon this logic. Alicent doesn't view Viserys as weak or incapable at ruling. She inspires Aegon to rule like his father.
It's my hope that, once enthroned, you would honour the burden of your new duties, be silent, and strive to learn from the more studied minds around you, in the hope that you might be half the king your father was.
This creates definite problems within her character arc as a whole. In one moment, she wants political influence and dynastic control. In another, she suddenly wants to escape from court life entirely, telling Rhaenyra simply she wants to live and be free. These desires are not entirely incompatible. To fight for survival within a war is to have some sort of self-preservation. But the writers seem unwilling to let Alicent fully embrace either side of her. As a result, Alicent exists in a constant state of narrative indecision. She oscillates between antagonist and victim, co-conspirator and moral observer, without granting any narrative weight within either category. The supporting cast needs more depth. One of House of the Dragon's greatest challenges moving into season 3 is not its spectacle, battle scales, or dragon sequences, but its supporting cast. The series has successfully made viewers emotionally invested in central figures, particularly Rhaenyra, Alicent, and Daemon, but it has often done so at the expense of the world around them. This becomes particularly notable because the Dance of the Dragons is not merely a war between two individuals, it's a generational war involving children, heirs, political advisors, ambitious nobles, and families whose futures are tied to this conflict. Too often, the story frames the series as a tragedy between Rhaenyra and Alicent.
Rhaenyra. It's best, I think, if we go back to Dragonstone. You've already survived.
Where the source material presents a far wider network of motivations. This issue becomes more apparent because the younger characters have yet to develop clear identities, personal goals, beyond what the story as a large tells of them. Figures such as Joffrey, Aegon III, Viserys, Daeron, Baela, and Rhaena should not simply function as extensions of Rhaenyra or Alicent's narrative. The dance is fundamentally a war over succession and instability. Therefore, the younger generation should present as the future itself being fought over. In Fire and Blood, these characters exist within a larger political structure, where every child carries dynastic importance. Aegon III eventually inherits not only a throne, but the psychological scars left behind by the destruction around him.
The small folk of the Seven Kingdoms speak of King Aegon III Targaryen as Aegon the Unlucky, Aegon the Unhappy, and, most often, the Dragonbane, when they remember him at all. All these names are apt. Grand Maester Muncan, who served him for a good part of his reign, calls him the Broken King, which fits him even better. Of all the men ever to sit the Iron Throne, he remains perhaps the most enigmatic, a shadowy monarch who said little and did less, and lived a life steeped in grief and melancholy.
Daeron earns the title Daeron the Daring through his military leadership and actions during the war. Baela and Rhaena are not simply daughters of Daemon. They become active participants whose choices later shape events. These characters should have their own desired outcome and their own understanding of what victory means for them. Some may fight for family loyalty, some for survival, and others for ambition, but those motivations need larger character development on screen. The lack of development also affects major characters such as Corlys Velaryon, Moseria, Laurie Strong, and Helena.
Let our enemy see that we will answer outrage with outrage.
And if I refuse? Will you burn me as you did Aegon?
That is a lie.
I saw it. You burned him, and you let him fall.
These are characters with enormous narrative potential, whose ambition often feels underexplored. Corlys, in particular, is one of the most politically advanced figures in Westeros. He built the wealth and influence of House Velaryon through voyages and political maneuvering long before the dance. Yet, much of his role in the show has gradually shifted towards reacting to Rhaenyra or Daemon, rather than pushing his own ambition. Similarly, Moseria possesses networks of information and influence that should make her one of the most dangerous players in King's Landing, while Laurie Strong remains one of the most mysterious figures in the story. The problem is not the lack of screen time alone. It is if the viewer knows what these characters truly want. The small council themselves also requires much greater development because in Game of Thrones, the council becomes almost like a character in and of itself. The King's small council under Robert and later the Lannisters functioned as a battlefield of personalities and agendas. Every member brought a different worldview and personal loyalty into the room.
His Grace has many cares. He entrusts some small matters to us that we might lighten the load.
We are the lords of small matters here.
Even relatively minor figures, such as Grand Maester Pycelle, possessed hidden loyalties and interwoven plot lines that influenced broader events. Viewers understood that these meetings were not simply moments of exchange, they were contests for power. Every conversation contained tension because everyone wanted something different. By comparison, House of the Dragon's Green and Black Councils often feel like narrative devices designed to move the plot forward, rather than political ecosystems filled with contention and ambition. Characters such as Tywin Lannister, Jasper Orwyle, and Baltimus Celtigar frequently function as voices for delivering objection rather than positive input. No clear motivation is ever weighed with these characters. Otto Hightower and Sir Criston Cole are among the few members who sort of have personal goals, yet the dance itself should feel like it's caught between division. Some members of the council should inspire for peace, while others pursue power and personal advancement. The Black Council in particular possesses the same entrapment. Staunton, Darkland, and Massey are simplified names on a map. They possess families of noble birth, high-ranking lands, armies, and families with a future to Rhaenyra's claim. While supporting characters become reduced to function instead of people, the stakes of their actions become less meaningful. As Season 3 approaches, expanding these supporting characters will strengthen the series in a major way. The Dance of the Dragons is ultimately a story about an entire generation inheriting the consequences of the previous failures. Beware the butterflies. When the man who built Game of Thrones' empire watches his creation slip from his grasp, the consequences are rarely quiet. The public drama between George R.R. Martin and Ryan Condon, showrunner of House of the Dragon, stands as one of the most contentious author adaptation clashes in recent television history.
George R.R. Martin has dropped this banger. I do not look forward to the other posts I need to write about everything that's gone wrong with House of the Dragon, but I need to do that too, and I will. I've never heard George talk like this about Game of Thrones, anything.
What began as a relationship rooted in mutual respect, shared passion for Westeros, and Martin's personal endorsement for Condon has now dissolved into what the author himself has bluntly labeled abysmal. At the heart of this rift lies a perfect storm of creative differences and harsh production realities. In early 2023, HBO quickly slashed House of the Dragon Season 2 from 10 episodes down to 8. What was supposed to be an epic sweeping chapter of Targaryen civil war was quickly rearranged, distorted, and some places gutted, all while the Hollywood writer strike loomed large. Budget pressures, scheduling nightmares, and the major scale of production forced Condon and producer Sarah Hess into a painful game of creative tragedy. Major battles and plot sequences from Fire and Blood were pushed back into Season 3, leaving Season Season 2 feeling structurally stagnant and lack of meaningful narrative progression. From ignored notes and deleted blog posts to pointed public comments and HBO stepping in as mediator, the conflict has played out with an unusual amount of transparency. Martin's fierce protectiveness over his characters he has long described as his children.
Like I was saying in the other interview, it's portraits of his children. These are all my children. So I have a lot of affection for all of them.
This coincides with Condon's responsibility to deliver a compelling, streamlined drama that both honors the narrative and honors the adaptation Condon has now chosen to portray. This fallout has raised uncomfortable questions from fans and creators alike. When does necessary adaptation become damaging deviation? Miscommunication, George R.R. Martin, and Ryan Condon. The growing divide between George R.R. Martin and Ryan Condon has brought renewed attention to the long-standing question in adaptation studies. How much authority should an author retain once their work is translated to the screen? What initially began as a seemingly strong creative partnership built on the shared enthusiasm for adapting Fire and Blood for a television series has gradually deteriorated into a strained relationship that Martin himself has described in stark terms. Over time, the situation has been marked by reportedly disagreement over narrative changes and the handling over book material and overall direction of the series. Accounts of tension include claims of ignored or heavily altered source material notes, public-facing criticism that has since been edited or removed from Martin's personal blog, and increasing reports of HBO stepping in to mediate between the two creative sides. While neither party has fully outlined every point of the disagreement in great detail, the broader pattern suggests a widening gap between Martin's vision of the adaptation and the show's reluctance on a bigger theatrical scale for a television production. Martin was instrumental in bringing Ryan Condon on board for House of the Dragon, the HBO prequel series based on his 2018 book Fire and Blood.
I'm excited. That's always a little apprehensive when you turn your baby over to foster parents, but I'm involved in this. It's great to have Ryan, who's a great writer, and someone who really knew my world. He's going to do his best to remain faithful to it.
Their professional relationship actually dated back years prior. Condon, as a longtime fan of Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire series, first met the author at a book convention in 2005. By 2013, Condon had actively sought out a meeting with Martin while working on another project, and the two developed a genuine friendship over a meal and a conversation about fantasy, storytelling, and Westeros as a whole. When HBO began developing the spin-off following the conclusion of Game of Thrones, Martin pitched several ideas, including the Targaryen Civil War, known as the Dance of the Dragon. After other writers cycled through the project with some varying degree of success, Martin sought out Condon as the right fit for the project.
One of them was the Duncan Egg show, which they didn't pick up on, but I pitched them the Dance of the Dragons, which I already knew about. I'd already written about to some extent in some novellas and in the World of Ice and Fire history book. Another illustrated coffee table like that, and they liked that. So we were going with the Dance of the Dragons, and we've been developing it, since 2016 in one form or another. There were a couple of the writers on the show before Ryan Condon came on, and Ryan, of course, has done an amazing job. But one of the big issues with all of these writers was where to begin. Yeah.
He personally recommended him to HBO executives, effectively hiring him for his role. Martin later explains his reasoning. Condon not only knows the source material, but also has a strong approach for fantasy as a genre. Early on, the collaboration was highly productive and mutually respectful, Martin recalled in a candid January 2026 Hollywood Reporter interview. I thought Ryan and I were partners, and we were all through the first first season. I would read early drafts of the script, I would give notes, he would change some things. It worked really well, I thought. His hands-on involvement reflects Martin's desire to avoid a repeat on the more distant relationship he had with the original Game of Thrones showrunners in the later season. A key test of their early alliance came during production of season 1. Condon and co-showrunner Miguel Sapochnik, the proclaimed director known for depicting major battle sequences within Game of Thrones, reportedly clashed over creative and leadership issues. When tensions arose, Condon sought Martin's support in the dispute. Martin sided with Condon, backing him during what became a pivotal tension between the two. Sapochnik ultimately departed the series after season 1 in 2022, leaving Condon as the sole showrunner.
Miguel was involved in the creative process, but he was really more there as the filmmaker of the show to bring it to life visually.
This show of loyalty from Martin underscores the strength of their partnership at the time. It helped solidify Condon's vision of the series moving forward. Many observed and noted that Martin's endorsement carried significant weight, given his stature as the creator of the entire universe. HBO executives have since confirmed that Condon was Martin's choice for the project, not an imposition by the network. However, this foundation of trust and collaboration would erode significantly once production moved into season 2, setting the stage for the deep rift that followed. Tensions escalated notably during the production and writing of House of the Dragon Season 2. Martin felt his input was increasingly disregarded as the show progressed, moving forward throughout the season, shifting from a collaborative dynamic to one where his extensive notes were often sidelined. He explains this in detail during his January 2026 Hollywood Reporter interview. Then we got into Season 2, and he basically stopped listening to me. I would give him notes and nothing would happen. Sometimes he would explain why he wasn't doing it. Other times he would tell me, "Oh, okay, yeah, I'll think about it." It got worse and worse, and I began to get more and more annoyed. Finally, it got to a point where I was told by HBO that I could submit all my notes to them and they would give Ryan our combined notes. This formal redirectory of feedback through HBO's executives mark a clear breakdown and direct communication between Martin and Condon, effectively severing a layer of network mediation into what Martin had once believed was a true partnership. The public flashpoint arrived in early September 2024, shortly after season 2 concluded airing. Martin published in a since-deleted blog post on his official site titled "Beware the Butterflies." With the intervention of HBO, he was directed to delete the blog post. In the post, he zeroed in on changes made within the highly anticipated Blood and Cheese sequence in season 2, a brutal assassination plot drawn from Fire and Blood. Once she realized what he had meant, Queen Helena pleaded with the men to kill her instead. "A wife's not a son," said Blood. "It has to be a boy." She is warned the queen to make a choice soon, before Blood grew bored and raped her little girl. "Pick," he said, "or we will kill them all." On her knees weeping, Helena named her youngest son Maegor. Perhaps she thought the boy was too young to understand, or perhaps it was because the elder boy, Jaehaerys, was the King Aegon's firstborn son and heir, next in line to the throne. "You hear that, little boy?" She's whispered to Maegor. "Your mama wants you dead." Specifically, Martin's criticism about removing or altering young Maegor, the youngest son of King Aegon II and Queen Helena. In the books, Maelor's presence and ultimate fate plays a pivotal role within the height of the dance. Martin argued that omitting or delaying the character caused a butterfly effect, a concept in chaos theory stating that small, seemingly insignificant changes alter courses dramatically and ultimately lead to different outcomes.
The children that we had in the story were simply too young to be able to construct that narrative exactly as laid out in the book, period. I have lots of experience working with very young performers.
They are babies.
To ask two 4-year-olds to play through that level of drama it's just not a realistic expectation. And then there's also a practical element
He warned small changes could have large and more toxic butterflies in season 3 and 4. Martin elaborated on the broader consequences, noting the loss of Maegor weakened the emotional impact of Blood and Cheese's climax, altering key events that we would see in future seasons, such as Bitterbridge involving horror and heroism, undercutting Helena's emotional arc, and altering public comment within King's Landing, which ultimately drives the plot forward.
Grand Maester Munken's true telling says that the boy was torn limb from limb by the mob, but names no names. All we know for certain is that by the time Lady Caswell and her knights appeared to chase off the mob, the prince was dead. Her ladyship went pale at the sight of him, Mushroom tells us, saying, "The gods will curse us all for this." At her command, Sly the stable boy and Willow Poundstone were hanged from the centre span of the old bridge, along with the man who had owned the horse Ericard had stolen from the inn, who was wrongly thought to have assisted Thorne's.
He revealed that he had pushed back against cutting Maegor when Condon had first proposed it years earlier, primarily for practical reasons like avoiding casting another really young actor and budget control. Initially, Condon had assured Martin that they were not erasing Maegor entirely, but just postponing him. Martin wrote, "When Ryan Condon first told me what he had meant to do ages ago, back in 2022, might be, I argued against it for all of these reasons. I didn't argue long or with much heat, however. The changes weakened the sequence, I felt, but only a bit, and Ryan had what seemed to be practical reasons for it. They didn't want to deal with casting another kid, especially a 2-year-old. Kids that young will inevitably slow down production, and there would be budget implications. Budget was always an issue on House of the Dragon. It made sense to save money wherever we could. However, Ryan assured me that we would not lose Prince Maegor, simply postpone him. Queen Helena could give birth to him in season 3, presumably after getting with child late in season 2. That made sense to me, so I withdrew my objections and acquiesced to the changes. The post was intended as the first in a series of 6 critical pieces Martin planned to write about the adaptation's direction. It spread rapidly online before being taken down, ignited fan discussion, divided reaction, and widespread media outrage. Many book readers sided with Martin's concerns about fidelity, while others defended the show's need to streamline timelines and manage production realities. Sources closest to the production revealed the tension reaching a boiling point during a pivotal Zoom meeting ahead of House of the Dragon Season 3 planning. In the call, which included Condell, other producers, and HBO executive, Condell presented his detailed vision and outline for the upcoming season. Martin responded by having numerous objections and simply stated with evident frustration, "This is not my story any longer." This dramatic statement crystallized Martin's growing sense of alienation from the project he helped launch and once viewed as a true partnership. Following the contentious call, HBO executives reportedly asked Martin to take a step back from active involvement within the series temporarily as a way to reset. He was later brought back on board in a more limited capacity as an executive producer, though his direct influence on creative direction appeared very limited to none. For his part, Condell addressed the public criticism and open discourse in March 2025 in an Entertainment Weekly article, expressing both disappointment and commentating on his personal response as a showrunner. "I made every effort to include George in the adaptation process. I really did. But at some point, he just became unwilling to acknowledge the practical issues at hand in a responsible way. I just had to keep marching forward for the sake of the crew, the cast, and for HBO, because this is my job. I can only hope that George and I can rediscover that harmony someday." At the same time, it is worth remembering that Martin's frustration does not come from somebody unfamiliar with the reality of television production.
I mean, he used to do this. He was a television writer for over 10 years. So he, I think he knows that process. I mean, he cares very deeply about this world, but he also has, this is one thing in a million things that he has. He's writing multiple books. He's got other television series. So I think, not that it's, not that it's not important, it's just, it's a feature of his life, whereas this is my life.
Long before he became a world-successful fantasy author, Martin spent decades working in the entertainment industry as a television writer and producer, collaborating with series such as The Twilight Zone and Beauty and the Beast. More recently, he had also worked on a collaboration project with world building in a video game called Elden Ring.
Mikula the Kind spoke of the beginning. The seduction and the betrayal. An affair from which gold arose.
Whether one agrees with Martin's criticisms or not, his objection does not come from somebody not understanding what it takes to navigate these spaces. It comes from somebody who has first-hand experience understanding the practicality and the creative difficulties in a production, adaptation, and collaborative storytelling. While Martin remains officially attached to the project, the public airing of these grievances has added an extra layer of drama to House of the Dragon journey, keeping fans and media speculating about how much of the remaining story will align with the source material. HBO chief Casey Bloys addressed the situation diplomatically in early 2026, framing it as a normal creative tension in a high-stakes adaptation. When asked about fan reactions to House of the Dragon Season 2 and Martin's very public criticism, Bloys downplayed any broad division among viewers, quipping, "Well, I'm not sure that fans were divided over Season 2, Bloys replied. Deadline interview responded, "Maybe just George R.R. Martin," in clear reference to his infamous blog post. Bloys' response is peculiar, to say the least. The seemingly light-hearted, sarcastic remarks, widely interpreted as a direct, if not humorous, reference to George R. R. Martin himself, being the primary and perhaps only significant voice of discord regarding the adaptation's changes and framework from the source material. Bloys elaborated further in the same Deadline interview. "Like any good American family, I would prefer that our discord stays behind closed doors, but here we are." He praised Condon as an excellent showrunner and a really good partner and collaborator, while acknowledging Martin's fundamental role in recommending him to HBO in the first place. Bloys emphasized that the network fully endorsed Condon's vision and creative choices. HBO drama programming head Franny Orsi, also known as Francesca Orsi, offered additional context on Martin's level of involvement across the Game of Thrones universes when asked about his level of control. She replied, "We'll always value his input in terms of the writers we're hiring, the arenas we're tackling for new spin-offs, and the development of each project across the GOT universe. By building, producing, and running a series is a massive undertaking. While we care deeply about George and our other showrunners' perspective, we ultimately make decisions that make the best show." Reading in between the lines, this reads like polished corporate or HR language. "We value George's opinion and appreciate his advice, but in practice, his input is no longer carrying meaningful weight in the creative process." This underlying message seems respectful, while simultaneously signaling that House of the Dragon is moving on with or without Martin's approval. HBO Max cutting 2 episodes. The reduction of House of the Dragon Season 2 from a plotted 10 episodes to just 8 had a noticeable impact on the pacing and completeness of several key plot points. This decision, made in early 2023, forced showrunner Ryan Condon and writing team to compress or defer major plot points that originally took place in the timeline that they needed. While HBO described the change as story-driven, insiders and later reporters pointed out practical concerns, including the 2023 Hollywood writers' strike and cost-cutting pressures. According to behind-the-scenes book House of the Dragon: Dawn of the Targaryen Civil War, showrunner Ryan Condon, producer/writer writer Sarah Hess and the writing team initially plotted out a 10-episode season to build towards the deadly confrontation we see in Fire and Blood, known as the Battle of the Gullet. The decision to cut 2 episodes came in early 2023 at a looming WGA Writers Guild of America strike and broader industry cost pressures at Warner Brothers Discovery. The extended 10-episode production schedule would have required another lengthy 10-month shoot, potentially delaying the season premiere until 2025, a timeline no one wanted. This comment contrasts with Condon's previously framed statements, emphasizing that the narrative benefit allowed them proper time and spacing between emotional beats, and this season would prioritize character development. Producer Sarah Hess directly contradicts this notion and says that the shorter timeline was never really their choice, although it is a creative one. In an Entertainment Weekly article, Hess states regarding the reduction from 10 episodes to 9, "It wasn't really our choice." Hess's remarks suggest that this decision came from higher-ups at HBO, likely tied to budget scheduling rather than a purely creative decision. Both Ryan and Hess actively acknowledge having to rewrite and shift certain plot points due to the season's reduction of episode count. This is increasingly worrisome, with the WGA strikes halting all forms of writing and revisions. Interviews suggest that Condon and Hess were forced to rewrite and adjust certain elements on the fly to keep production moving. Deadline reported in March 2023 that the initial plan was for another 10-episode arc, which ultimately changed, leading to some script rewrites. Although HBO publicly described the reduction as story-driven, the reports emerged during Warner Brothers' broader wave of cost-cutting measures underneath the CEO, David. This rewrite process led to a noticeable difference in Season 2's finale. As The Ringer observed after the finale aired, Episode 8 would have worked great as the setup for a final couple of episodes, but it had too many loose threads and half-fulfilled plot lines to feel satisfying as a season finale. Many viewers and critics described it as feeling anticlimactic or incomplete, with the season building tension without delivering a satisfying payoff. Business Insider similarly noted many viewers described the finale as a 70-minute trailer for Season 3, emphasizing the season's build-up rather than resolution. Condon and Hess had discussed in interviews how they navigated these limitations while trying to maintain momentum, but the episode reduction clearly forced them in a difficult choice on what they could and could not fit in the 8-episode framework. Additional subplots felt truncated due to the tighter runtime. Elements involving Green's consolidation of power, deepening exploration of the small folks' shifting loyalties, and certain Dragonseed recruitments or regional movements were streamlined or deferred. Rhaenyra's secret return to Dragonstone and negotiation with Alicent teased a dramatic outturn of events, also lacking a full resolution within the 8 episodes, leaving some character motivations and tensions underdeveloped. HBO executives, including Casey Bloys and Francesca Orsi, maintain that the adjustment served to the long-term health of the series, with plans for Season 3 and 4 to conclude the Dance of the Dragons. However, the cuts ultimately require sacrifice, depth in certain plot lines to maintain focus on core characters, conflicts in King's Landing, and in Dragonstone. The compression became especially visible in the omission of the Battle of the Gullet. From Season 2's climax in Fire and Blood, the battle represented one of the dance's defining turning points, dramatically escalating the war's scale and consequence. Instead, the series concluded with armies merely mobilizing, reinforcing criticism that the season functioned more as narrative buildup rather than a self-contained dramatic arc. The decision to maintain House of the Dragon as a 4-season series, despite reducing Season 2, 3, and potentially 4 to only 8 episodes, raises significant concerns about pacing, narrative consistency, and adaptation fidelity moving forward. George R.R. Martin previously suggested that the story of the Dance of the Dragons ideally required 4 seasons with 10 episodes each. This was to prioritize the scale and emotional complexity of Fire and Blood. With 6 total episodes episodes now effectively removed from the original structure, future seasons will likely face even greater pressures to consolidate major battles, political development, character arcs in a shorter runtime. The reduction in episode count has entirely eliminated what would have originally been an entire episode of build-up and political setup before the battle. Additionally, the material that would have occupied a hypothetical episode 9 of season 2 appears to be lost entirely through narrative restructuring and the streamline of key events. This raises broader concern about how the cuts will affect the overall structure of House of the Dragon. This compression risks repeating much of the same criticisms directed at season 2. As the dance grows in intensity and larger scope, they may focus in on these elements rather than emotional weight and character development. Many of these deferred plotlines are expected to surface in season 3, but the ripple effects of season 2's cuts will likely continue to shape the series' trajectory. Reframing the Targaryen Civil War. House of the Dragon has fundamentally altered the sensual conflict of the Dance of the Dragons. In George R. R. Martin's Fire and Blood, the Civil War is primarily a dynastic struggle between Rhaenyra Targaryen and her half-brother Aegon II, fueled by questions of survival and legitimacy of heirs. The show, however, has shifted the emotional and narrative core to the broken relationship between Rhaenyra and Alicent Hightower.
What do you mean? My father has made some worrying allegations about you. Were you with your uncle? Oh, I haven't seen him in years. He took me into the city for some fun. Tell me the whole of it, Rhaenyra. Your father accused me of something. Was I drank wine, left the castle after dark? You fucked David in a pleasure house.
Showrunner Ryan Condon has explicitly framed the series as Rhaenyra and Alicent's story, showing how these women navigate a traditionally patriarchal society. This reframing turns a brutal civil war into a deeply personal tragedy about two former lovers torn apart by patriarchy, effectively making Alicent and Rhaenyra the true narrative rather than Aegon. This creative choice has significantly diminished Aegon II's role in the political complexity of the conflict. In the book, Aegon is a central protagonist whose claim rests on a long-standing Westerosi tradition and widespread conviction over Rhaenyra's illegitimate sons.
And the Reach, to be ruled from Old Town. Rhaenyra rejected her stepmother's proposal with scorn. Your sons might have had places of honor at my court if they had kept faith, her grace declared. But they sought to rob me of my birthright, and the blood of my sweet sons is on their hands. Bastard blood shed at war, Alicent replied. My sons' sons were innocent boys, cruelly murdered. How many more must die to slake your thirst for vengeance?
The show sidelines him dramatically, reducing him to a pawn in his mother's story, and gives him limited screen time and agency in season 1. By elevating Alicent as Rhaenyra's primary foil, the series transforms the dance from a war about succession, law, power, and ideological difference into an intimate character study of two women's pain, regret, and lost love. It narrows the story's scope and often forces political events to feel like secondary consequences of their own personal rift rather than direct forces within their own right.
But if you and I may come to terms...
There are no terms now. You have no army. Your allies turn from you when they hear of your depravity. Your hands are bloody to no crime I could never have imagined you.
The trespass was not mine. I think we will. I am a mother too, and you have yet to answer for the murder of my son.
I repudiate that act with all my heart.
Of course you do. I'm usurping my rightful inheritance.
This reframing comes at a notable cost. By centering Alicent and Rhaenyra's relationship as the emotional heart of the war, the show softens the moral ambiguity presented in the source material. It risks reducing a complex, multi-sided civil war into a more binary tragedy of two women crushed by the men around them. While Condon and Hess's vision has created compelling television moments, it has also pulled the story away from the broader moments and grittier layered tension beyond the political landscape Martin has written towards, leaving the dance feeling smaller and more intimate, and at times less consequential. The main relationship, Rhaenyra and Alicent. The central relationship between Alicent and Rhaenyra is a significant alter from the source material, creating ripple effects and reshaping character motives. In Fire and Blood, Alicent is approximately 9 years older than Rhaenyra. Their friendship is never depicted as a close childhood friendship. The book portrays them as more of rivals, with tension escalating after Alicent marries the king Viserys and begins producing male heirs. The show, however, deliberately ages the characters closer together and establishes them as intimate confidants in their youth, sharing private jokes, reading under the godwood tree, and displays tender physical affection that goes beyond typical friendship.
Syrax is growing quickly. She'll soon be as large as Caraxes. That's almost large enough to settle too. I believe I'm quite content as a spectator. Thank you.
The visual language in early scenes, soft lighting, lingering glances, and close proximity heavily evoke a romantic trope frequently used to signal suppressed or forbidden love. The lost lover framework is not merely implied, it has heavily been reinforced through the creative team behind the series. Showrunner Ryan Condon and writer/executive producer Sarah Hess have consistently emphasized the importance of Rhaenyra and Alicent's relationship as the emotional core of the series. Across multiple interviews and post-episode features, Condon has described their relationship as the central love story driving the tragedy of the Dance of the Dragons.
This will always be about framed around those two women. Now, of course, they're in very different places and they're at war with each other, so the connection is more ephemeral, I think.
Sarah Hess has been particularly vocal about the depth of their connection, stating in an interview in 2022, "There's an element of queerness to it, whether you see it that way or just the unbelievable passionate relationship that women have with each other at that age. At the core of it, they knew each other as children, they loved each other, and that doesn't go away." Hess has described their connection as profound and primal, noting that their trauma of shared separation, divided by politics and patriarchy and familiar manipulation, continues to haunt the women even into adulthood.
Alicent and Rhaenyra are both affected by what they have lost and the history that they have with each other. You don't forget it.
Director Geeta Patel, who helmed Season 1, Episode 8, The Lord of the Tides, has also been very explicitly clear within this direction. Speaking about the emotional climax of this episode, she stated, "Alicent is feeling very alone. She feels that she has no real partner in her life, even her father. So when she sees Rhaenyra enter, that's what she wants. She wants the love in her life. And it's a bit of a love story, in a way, of these two women." Patel has also reframed their dynamic as a bit of a love story, describing it as two lovers who have had a divorce but still love each other. The cast have also echoed the same sentiments. Young Alicent actress Emily Carey revealed, "I immediately sensed that Rhaenyra and Alicent were in love a little bit."
Tactile closeness. We are very touchy-feely, especially as women. You know, we're allowed to change in front of each other, and we hug and we kiss and we hold in ways that boys, I guess, don't, which we need to change, by the way. This is not a stereotype that I enjoy, but unfortunately it does exist. But there's just this pure closeness where it does toe the line between platonic and romantic, because I think at 14 you don't really know what platonic and romantic is, what the words mean, let alone what the feelings mean. And so we definitely talked about it and we definitely tried to play that in as well, so I'm glad that it read.
Olivia Cooke, who plays adult Alicent, has also called her character messy and emotionally dependent on Rhaenyra, noting, "To hate somebody, there first has to be passion there." Cooke has also shared that she and Emma Darcy discussed the characters being each other's first love, with Sarah Hess revealing Cooke's personal headcanon that the two had kissed or had some sort of physical interaction in their youth that was discovered and forbidden. Emma Darcy also added further context on the intensity of their teenage bond. "I think there's an erotic energy in most intense teenage relationship because it's a period of trying to work out what one is and what one wants." This layer of emotional foundation reaches its peak in Season 1 during their reunion, when Alicent tells Rhaenyra, "We're both mothers. We both try to guide our children and keep them safe."
Your graciousness moves me deeply, Princess. We're both mothers. And we love our children. We have more in common than we sometimes allow.
The line carries the weight of deep, unresolved personal trauma, transforming a political moment into one of tragic intimacy. Even in Season 2, director Geeta Patel emphasized the key transformation within the sept scene.
When was your plan first laid? Was your ambition so keen? He changed his mind, Rhaenyra. He changed his mind. I swear this to you, on the memory of my mother. I've been at times unkind, but never untrue. I pronounced before all gathered in that room that you would make a fine queen. Do you think me capable of such naked deceit?
Really all about the relationship between Rhaenyra and Alicent, and for both to remind one another of the love you once shared. Fan reception remains sharply divided. Many viewers interpret their relationship as a sapphic tragedy supported by the show's own deliberate queer coding. Others see it as an intense, passionate bond, but starkly platonic. Criticism has also argued cast members, writers, and directors have frequently discussed romantic undertones between the characters in interviews and behind the scenes, but when it comes to the show, it hasn't been completely confirmed. As a result, some audience members contend that much of the relationship remains confirmed through subtext rather than explicit storytelling. Regardless of interpretation, the heavy emphasis on Rhaenyra and Alicent's entanglement significantly shifts the story's center away from the book and a more straightforward sibling rivalry and succession crisis. This creative choice is most evident in the marginalization of Aegon II. In Fire and Blood, he serves as the primary candidate and rival claim to Rhaenyra. In Season 1 of the show, however, the character played by Tom Glencarny received only 14 to 15 minutes of total screen time, reducing him to more of a pawn in the larger story. By foregrounding the broken relationship between Rhaenyra and Alicent, House of the Dragon reframes the Dance of the Dragons as the tragic fallout of a deeply personal betrayal, one shaped by politics, patriarchy, and lost love, rather than a pure pursuit and battle for the Iron Throne. The Patriarchy. House of the Dragon Season 1 and 2 positions patriarchy as the central driving force of the Targaryen Civil War, the Dance of the Dragons. The show frames nearly every conflict through the lens of systemic oppression against women.
The important thing for us was to look at the way the patriarchy sees and conditions women to believe that they are of lesser value, and
making Rhaenyra struggle less about personal ambition, dynastic law, or political weavering, and more about being a victim of Westerosi's misogyny. While this approach adds emotional intensity and modern resonance, it functions as a double-edged sword. It humanizes the conflict and flattens the moral complexity and character agency found in George R. R. Martin's Fire and Blood.
And behind the mountain dwelt 3 wild dragons, never claimed nor ridden by any man, living or dead. The small folk had named them Sheep Stealer, Grey Ghost, and the Cannibal. Find riders to master Silverwing, Vermithor, and Sea Smoke, and we will have 9 dragons against Aegon's 4. Mount and fly their wild kin, and we will number 12, even without Stormcloud, Princess Rhaenys pointed out. That is how we shall win this war.
Ryan Condon and Sarah Hess have been explicit about their thematic purpose. In a detailed interview with the Motion Picture Associate, Condon explains how the underlying conflict of the series isn't just about dragons, but about a society fundamentally built to deny absolute power to women. This war is very much about that. So one of the many things we wanted to do in this series is navigate what it is like to live as powerful women, specifically through the eyes of 2 of the very most powerful women in this series, against the overwhelming traditional and social structure of keeping men in power and keeping women in their place. Hess has reinforced this, emphasizing that violence against women is inherent in a patriarchal system. This becomes the emotional thesis of which House of the Dragon falls back on time and time again. In Fire and Blood, the Greens' case against Rhaenyra is multifaceted and deeply inner-rooted with Westerosi tradition and practice within politics. Male primogeniture, the principle that a son inherits before a daughter, was formally embedded within Andal custom, a principle and law that is retained by the faith of the Seven. Beyond gender, the Greens vocalized serious and widespread concerns about legitimacy. Rhaenyra's 3 firstborn sons, Jace, Luke, and Joffrey, were visibly fathered by Harwin Strong rather than Laenor Velaryon. The book makes this plain. The boys have the dark hair and brown eyes of the Valyrian lineage, in stark contrast of the silver gold hair and Valyrian features expected of the true-born Targaryen Valyrian offspring.
One of these Strongs put out Aemon's eye, never forget. He was a boy, aye, but the boy is the father to the man, and bastards are monstrous by nature. Sir Criston Cole spoke up. Should the princess reign, he reminded them, Jaehaerys Velaryon would rule after her. 7 save this realm if we seat a bastard on the Iron Throne.
Placing obvious bastards on the Iron Throne was seen as an existential threat to the stability and purity of the royal line. One of the main drivers for Team Green seizing the Iron Throne was survival, as the narrative makes very clear that Rhaenyra, to secure her claim, she would have to eliminate her half-brothers, a reality both sides understood. The conflict in Fire and Blood is far more nuanced than a simple tale of a woman being usurped by a sexist man. Both sides had justifiable claimants, rooted in precedent, law, and power politics. The realm had already experienced a violent usurpation brought on by Maegor the Cruel and Aegon the Uncrowned. It was not presented as a straightforward allegory of misogyny, but as a tragic civil war fueled by tradition, fears of instability, and personal grievances. The show largely sidelines any of these legitimate fears and complex motivations in favor for a simpler narrative. The Greens opposed Rhaenyra simply because she was a woman.
I myself served in this role with my husband. I'm well prepared to do it again.
You played your part admirably in a time of peace, Your Grace, but circumstances have changed. Experience is valuable, yes, but the Dowager Queen is a woman.
I'm no stranger to rule or to sitting at this council.
At a time when we must show strength.
Lord Larys?
I agree, Your Grace, it must be Prince Aemond.
Alicent's arc becomes one of internalized misogyny and a misunderstanding of Viserys' last dying word. Showrunner Ryan Condon has explicitly framed the series this way. This show is about these women who we met in their youth, when they were in their mid-teens, and it tells the story of those two people who grew up in a deeply political world at the height of power and wealth and influence, and then the pressures that were put upon them by the patriarchal system. He emphasizes it is very much a story about patriarchy told through the point of view of two women.
The thing the Great Council should tell you is that this is a patriarchy and that the men of the realm want to keep the men in power.
Sarah Hess has also highlighted there's so much in play: armies, dragons, castle strongholds, and political maneuvering. But at the end of the day, it comes down to these two women trying to figure it out. This broadly shifts from the book's original outline. It is incredibly dangerous to flatten the narrative in this manner, especially given today's polarized political climate. By framing Team Green's position as merely upholding oppressive tradition, the show turns a cautionary tale about destructive nature of unchecked ambition into something closer to a morality play. Instead of allowing their characters to be flawed, they turn the Dance of the Dragons into a simpler story of good women versus bad traditionalists. This heavy focus on the patriarchy often leaves the show's female characters in a bonded narrative where they become reactive, indecisive, or trapped by the system that will literally not let them make any decisions.
I do not think I can win this war.
I think you're tired.
My own son questions my capabilities.
By automatically framing Rhaenyra Targaryen as the unambiguous protagonist audiences are meant to support, the series simplifies a far more nuanced conflict. The series also repeats and highlights that Rhaenyra was the first woman publicly named as heir, but this is not accurate. In Fire and Blood, there was notable precedence. King Maegor named his young great-niece Princess Aerys Targaryen as his heir in 47 AC. Upon descending to the throne, King Jaehaerys initially recognized Aerys as his heir presumptive until he had children of his own. Good Queen Alicent strongly advised for her daughter, Princess Daenerys, to be named heir as she was the eldest child. In the books, Rhaenyra is a bolder and more ruthless figure. She personally executes Jaime Lannister to secure her son's inheritance, displaying a significant political cunning mixed with entitlement. As Fire and Blood records, Rhaenyra said, "Tell my half-brother I will have my throne or I will have his head." The show often softens her edges, portraying her more as a reluctant leader and implicated by the men around her.
We knew, even then, that men trained up for battle, eager to fight, to seek blood and glory. But you, I know you do not have that desire within you.
The treatment of Alicent Hightower reveals the most striking contrast. The show frames her as a largely naive to court machinations, a tragic pawn of her father, Otto, later a guilt-ridden, inconsolable mother whose decisions are largely based off of regrets over her lost bond she had with Rhaenyra. Book Alicent, by contrast, is calculating and a political operator from early on. She actively pushes Aegon to take the throne, believing that he is the only heir that the realm would accept. There is a clear survival instinct within this. If Aegon did not ascend the throne, Rhaenyra would have to eliminate him and his brothers to secure her rule. In Fire and Blood, Alicent leads a council of men in crowning Aegon and plays an active role in war effort. She is cunning, ruthless, and willing to accept great sacrifice. The show instead presents her as largely innocent, with the true desire for violence coming particularly from the men around her.
A sacrifice made for the stability of the realm. No king has ever lived that hasn't had to forfeit the lives of a few to protect the many, though I understand your squeamishness.
Reluctance to murder is not a weakness.
Sarah Hess has this to say about Alicent's characterization within the show. Alicent is working within the patriarchy. She tends to let the men steamroll her in most cases. In the end, she always gives up authority to the man, and she can't do anything about it. History is often written by men who write off women as crazy or hysterical or evil and conniving or gold digging or sex pots. This approach makes Alicent more sympathetic, but it ultimately disparages her agency and political capability within the narrative. Rather than portraying her as an active participant in the power struggle, the show narrows her frame of mind and isolates her.
An Lord here accede to this.
Your father is correct, Your Grace. A living challenger invites battle and bloodshed.
It is unsavory, yes. But a sacrifice we must make to secure Aegon's succession, and then there is Daemon to consider. The king wouldn't wish for any
The king did not wish for the murder of his daughter. He loved her. I will not have you deny this.
Yes.
One more word, and I will have you removed from this chamber and sent to the wall.
Ultimately making her an ignorant woman, overwhelmed by the violent men around her. Princess Rhaenys Targaryen suffers similarly. In Fire and Blood, she is a formidable dragon rider with a strong sense of political agency, who actively protests against being passed over, and her husband, Corlys Velaryon, actively dismisses key positions in protest of her claims dismissal. The show gives her memorable moments such as men would rather burn the realm than allow a woman ascend the Iron Throne. The speech is beautiful, but sidelines her agency completely in key moments. In episode 9 of season 1, Rhaenys criticizes Alicent by arguing that Alicent merely seeks a window in her prison rather than true power for herself.
A true queen counts the cost to her people. And yet you toil still in service to men. Your father, your husband, your son. You desire not to be free, but to make a window in the wall of your prison.
This scene frames Rhaenys as somebody who understands and resists the patriarchal power structure instead of submitting to it. However, episode 10 complicates things and arguably undermines the previous characterization. When Rhaenys arrives on Dragonstone, she is unable to call the Velaryon banners herself, instead waits patiently for Corlys to make the decision. Rather than acting as an independent political force, she stands back, awaiting her husband's approval before formally declaring for Rhaenyra. In the end, Rhaenys must persuade Corlys to support Rhaenyra, placing her in a similar position as Alicent, a woman navigating power indirectly through the authority of men, rather than exercising autonomous political control herself. By contrast, Fire and Blood allows their female characters agency, ruthlessness, and decision-making. It is the only way for the plot to go forward. They are not solely defined by their suffering under the patriarchy. Placing the women of House of the Dragon in this patriarchal box relies heavily on stereotype. The narrative suggests that men will never truly value a woman's opinion, isolating and limiting the story they aim to tell. Rhaenyra and Alicent are framed as virtuous figures, seeking mercy and peace without bloodshed.
To claim it, I must strike. And in striking, I doom thousands to their deaths.
He left you with no choice. Be strong. You know you are just. You must not let the realm fall to those who care for power more than peace.
At face value, this seems heroic, but it strips away much of their motivation. The war is largely pinned on the men, who are portrayed as the ones thirsting for violence and vengeance after the death of their sons, while the women remain on the sidelines, hoping and praying for peace. Brian Condell has described the series as telling the story centered around two women sitting at the forefront of this, then just coming up as friends and then breaking apart and becoming foes and being on two sides of this terrible civil war. That was all very interesting to us, and I think going deeper as we tried to have this kind of living conversation with the text of Fire and Blood and also history itself and how history is written, how women tend to be erased from history like this. At a certain point in the war, a point of no return should logically occur. In Fire and Blood, the death of Luke and Jaehaerys marked this eventual escalation. As the book states, Lucerys Velaryon died with his dragon, and with him, the war of ravens and envoys and marriage pacts came to an end, and the war of Fire and Blood began in earnest. Yet, the show reframes Lucerys' death as more of a tragedy and an accident, and keeps Alicent and Rhaenyra attempting compromise well into season 2.
You do not give me leave to go to anything. But who else is there? Rhaenys is dead and Baelor cannot bear the burden alone.
And when Aemond comes hunting for you, your dragon is young. Will you fly before Maegor as Luke did?
The narrative that the men are the only ones who want this war is hammered home repeatedly, which ultimately weakens the justification for this conflict. If grieving mothers do not desperately seek vengeance for their children or fight for their throne, the story has lost much of its emotional and political weight. This causes a standstill effect throughout much of season 2. Rhaenyra is largely sidelined by her council, who repeatedly tells her she cannot enter the fight because her death would preside their doom. She spends much of season 2 doing very little. In Fire and Blood, after Lucerys' death and a violent stillbirth, Rhaenyra is nearly catatonic with grief. However, the book makes this very clear that when she recovers, her fury and desire for vengeance are overwhelming. The show, by contrast, has her mount Syrax at the end of season 1, mere days after a traumatic labor.
At what cost? Princess Rhaenyra wondered. My sons would be riding 3 of those dragons, I remind you, and it would not be 9 against 4. I will not be strong enough to fly for some time yet.
Forcing them to invent reasons in season 2, often framed around her being too gentle as a woman to compete in the fighting. The similar pattern affects Alicent. Key moments of ruthlessness from the book are transplaced to Otto or Aemon, transforming her character in a more passive, guilt-ridden figure whose decisions are filtered through her regret over her lost bond with Rhaenyra. By making Patriarchy the overwhelming exploration for the war, the series risks reducing complex characters to victims or products of the system. The women of House of the Dragon are given powerful speeches about oppression, but are rarely denied the full range of their authority as in the books. The Aegon problem of it all. With the shifting storyline that House of the Dragon fundamentally wants to tell, the series has positioned Rhaenyra Targaryen as the unambiguous main character and the rightful heir to the Iron Throne. This approach largely eliminates any meaningful sympathy for other claimants and isolates the audience into choosing one possible side. Showrunner Ryan Condell has made this intention very clear. By alienating the audience from any legitimate perception other than Rhaenyra, the show pushes Aegon's claim almost entirely through the themes of patriarchy and misogyny.
And is still readying herself for the celebrations. This is why men wage war. Because a woman would never be ready for the battle in time.
Rather than exploring the innate survival instincts within A Dance of Dragons. Within House of the Dragon, they make it very clear why Aegon takes the throne. Yes, it is through tradition, but they mostly frame it through the patriarchal lens, and that a woman is unfit to rule. Because of this, they really eliminate the true aspect that once Rhaenyra comes to power and solidify her claim for her and her sons by eliminating the opposition. In doing so, they make every effort to make Aegon the villain. This reframing has severely sidelined Aegon II, who should function as a sensual protagonist or antagonist in the conflict.
The girl, Aegon, the one you sent fleeing from your company.
Oh, it's just having us fun. She didn't need to go get upset about it.
Think of the shame on your wife. On me. How can you keep carrying on like this, especially on a day like today?
Why? What is it today?
The series deliberately portrays him as a foolish, selfish, and often repulsive figure, a lazy drunkard, and a rapist with few redeeming qualities. This stands in stark contrast to his book counterpart in Fire and Blood. While the text describes Aegon II as quick to anger and slow to forgive, inclined to gluttony, and given to strong wines, it never paints him as short-sighted or outright stupid. He demonstrates political cunning, strategic thinking, and the ruthlessness necessary to win a civil war.
Rhaenyra, ever defiant, told her dear brother that she'd hoped he was dead. After you, Aegon answered. Then Sunfire bathed her in a blast of flame and devoured her in 6 bites where the sun washed.
The show's decision to amplify Aegon's worst traits, particularly his sexual assault of a servant, appears designed to make him irredeemable, ensuring viewers instinctually side with Rhaenyra. This choice is especially striking, giving Sarah Hess's own comments on the matter. I'm just going to preface a trigger warning before I say the following statement. This is Sarah Hess's words and not mine, and is incredibly triggering. I think just because somebody has committed this act, that it's not a reason that we can't have more nuanced discussion or to feel sympathy for him, while acknowledging that what he did was indefensible. It's simplistic to say he raped somebody, he's horrible and evil, and we can never find anything likable or interesting in him. I apologize that I even had to read that. That was probably one of the worst things that I've ever had to read on my channel, to excuse a rapist for their actions. I don't know who would even in their right mind say that in an interview and in a public setting. Despite this stated goal of nuance, the show largely abandons it, turning Aegon into a clean-cut villain. The series further undermines its own claims of moral complexity by heavily relying on the testimony of Mushroom, the most unreliable and salacious narrator in Fire and Blood. Many of the show's darker portrayals of Aegon and other characters stem from Mushroom, with his scandalous accounts, which George R. R. Martin presents as clear speculation. Ryan Condon has frequently defended deviations by arguing that Fire and Blood is a history book described with 3 unreliable narrators, giving the writers freedom to choose. Yet, the decision to consistently favor Mushroom's most extreme version raises questions about whether or not the show's truly engaging with the text's nuance or simply selecting the narrative that best serves their chosen theme. By simplifying the Green's motivations to misogyny and removing legitimate concerns about legitimacy and survival, House of the Dragon has sacrificed the moral grayness that defined Martin's work. Even when readers lean towards Black, they can understand Team Green's perspective. This strips away and leaves the dance feeling smaller and less like a tragedy. Everything is an accident. One of the most notable and frequently criticized storytelling choices in House of the Dragon seasons 1 and 2 is the persistent framing of large-scale escalations as accidents, misunderstandings, unintended consequences, rather than deliberate acts driven by revenge. This approach transforms the Dance of the Dragons from a brutal, choice-driven tragedy into something closer to an inevitable Greek tragedy where almost no one is truly at fault.
Which is that essentially it was going to be about this one family. It's a Greek tragedy.
As a result, actions carry diminished weight, and the audience is left with the impression that the war simply happened rather than being truly acted upon, chosen by flawed, power-hungry characters. Showrunner Ryan Condon has explicitly leaned into the framing, describing the series as a Greek tragedy about this one family, this Targaryen family. The thematic framework within this lens justifies portraying key elements as accidents rather than emotionally driven political power plays.
You sought greatness but shrank from spilling blood to achieve it, and I see you will suffer the same fate.
You struck down a child.
It was a mistake.
From the very beginning, key political waverings are softened or muddied. Otto Hightower initially supports Rhaenyra's ascension as heir to block Daemon in succession. Ironically, this creates the very crisis that later implodes. In Fire and Blood, Alicent is more proactive in pushing Aegon onto the throne, whereas the show places much of this scheming on Otto, while simultaneously portraying Alicent as largely caught off by her father's machinations. Her marriage to Viserys is framed more as a shocking personal betrayal and manipulation than a cold calculation of alliance made by Otto's long-term planning, feeling inconsistent and an accident. The brutal murder of Joffrey Lonmouth at Rhaenyra and Laenor's wedding feast from Sir Criston Cole feels like an act of pure aggression with no consequence. This pattern repeats itself later during the small council meeting where Criston kills Lord Beesbury in what is framed as an accidental act of aggression.
Throw down your sword and remove your cloak, Sir Criston. I am your Lord Commander, Sir Criston. Cast down your sword.
I will not suffer insults to Her Grace the Queen.
There was no insult to me, Sir Criston. You put aside your blade.
In both cases, the deaths of prominent nobles resulting in suspiciously few lasting consequences. Despite the political climate such acts would ordinarily carry within Westeros' society. The death of the Strongs is another example. Instead of a calculating power play by Alicent or the Greens, it is framed as Larry Strong acting unilaterally, with Alicent caught in the moral crossfires and horrified by his interpretation of her vague frustration. One of the most criticized moments comes with Alicent's interpretation of Viserys' dying words. She believes that the king's ramblings is about Aegon, and the prophecy refers to Aegon II, her son, when he is actually speaking of Aegon the Conqueror and Rhaenyra. Director Gita Patel and showrunners discussed at length how to earn this moment, deliberately turning what could be perceived as ruthless ambition into a tragedy of miscommunication.
He told me he wished for Aegon to be king.
As Patel explained, they wanted the audience to feel the vulnerability and innocence in Alicent, rather than conviction and calculation. Rhaenys Targaryen's dramatic dragon pit breakout during Aegon's coronation creates another issue. Hundreds of small folk are killed in the chaos, yet the major political figures survive unscathed. The scene is positioned as a dramatic warning rather than an initial act of war. Even the blockade of the Gullet, a deliberate black strategy to starve King's Landing, is downplayed. The show briefly mentions it, then has Rhaenyra distribute food to the small folk, softening its intense cruelty. Aemon's pursuit of Lucerys at the end, with Vhagar killing both boy and dragon, the show portrays it as an accident, with Aemon looking horrified towards the end, softening the complexity that is ultimately found in the source material. Blood and Cheese follows the same pattern. While horrifying, the show's version is made more chaotic and less cold and premature than the book's targeted A Son for a Son's revenge. Ryan Condell explains the change. We decided to sort of just open it up and say, what is the most awful version that Alicent would relate to historians, to implicate Rhaenyra and Daemon as the blackest of villains. This repeated "it was an accident" framework jeopardizes character arcs and limits their moral complexity. Characters are rarely able to be truly good or truly bad. They are often portrayed as misguided, which makes them appear foolish rather than ambitious or ruthless. In conclusion, in the end, Ryan Condell and Sarah Hess originally promised that House of the Dragon would deliver a faithful adaptation of Fire and Blood, a series crafted with care and attention that passionate fans of the source material would want to see. However, many viewers feel the product has delivered far from these earlier reassurances. From the beginning, the show introduced major deviations in the chronicle, character motivations, and thematic direction. These changes series extend beyond simple adaptation choices and fundamentally reshape the identity of key characters and the nature of the action itself. The most notable example is the reworking of Alicent Hightower and Rhaenyra Targaryen. In the source material, they are rivals driven by years of political resentment, ambition, and mutual distrust.
Queen Alicent had her own candidate, her eldest son, Prince Aegon, Rhaenyra's half-brother. But Aegon was a boy, the princess 10 years his elder. Moreover, the two half-siblings had never gotten on well. All the more reason to bind them together in marriage, the Queen argued. Viserys did not agree. The boy is Alicent's own blood, he told Lord Strong. She wants him on the
All of which contribute to the eventual tragedy of the dance. The show instead of reframes much of this conflict around misunderstanding, lingering attachment, and reluctant participation in the war. While this approach attempts to humanize both women, critics argue that it weakens the brutal political reality of the story and softens the agency of central players. Likewise, Aegon II suffers from a dramatic reinterpretation, with many viewers feeling the series' reducement or oversimplification of his personality and role is in direct conflict in favor of pushing a more one-sided emotional narrative.
Instead of safeguarding the sanctity of my family.
This is not the time for blind accusations, Your Grace. We'll know who did this soon enough.
Who did this? What? Is there any question who did this? Who will do this save the bitch queen of bastards? The smug cunt of Dragonstone! There she sits across the bay on her rock, laughing at me. She's fucking laughing at me!
Beyond individual characters, the adaptation has altered or removed many of the morally gray and uncomfortable elements that made Martin's version of the dance so compelling. The source material thrives on ambiguity, conflict within historical accounts, and the idea that nearly every faction contributes to the destruction of House Targaryen. In contrast, the show often appears hesitant to fully embrace the darker implications of their protagonist's decisions. As a result, some fans feel that many characters have been stripped away of their complexity that defined them in the book, replaced instead for a more modern or sanitized interpretation designed to have audiences' sympathy.
A Grand Maester should know the law and serve it, she told Orwell. You are no Grand Maester, and you bring only shame and dishonor to that chain you wear. As Orwell protested feebly, Rhaenyra's knights stripped his chain of office from his neck and forced him to his knees, whilst the princess bestowed the chain upon her own man, Maester Gerardis, a true and leal servant of the realm and its laws. As she sent Orwell and the other envoys on their way, Rhaenyra said, "Tell my half-brother that I will have my throne, or I will have his head."
This growing divide between adaptation and source material has led many longtime readers to feel alienated from the series. Rather than feeling like a direct translation of Fire and Blood to television, the show incredibly alters major aspects within interpretation, feeling more inspired by Martin's work than anything else. For critics of the adaptation, this creates the implication that the series largely and heavily relies on the legacy and popularity of George R. R. Martin's Fire and Blood and Game of Thrones, while simultaneously disregarding many of the core themes and characterizations that are portrayed within the story. Because of this, House of the Dragon no longer feels like an authentic adaptation, but rather a form of high-budget fanfiction that borrows the names, settings, and play structures that Martin's world has already shaped, and the core identity is something less recognizable. Based on the narrative trajectory already established in Season 1 and 2 of House of the Dragon, it appears headed towards a deeply unsatisfying conclusion in Season 4. The show will most likely conclude with Rhaenyra Targaryen's brutal death in Season 4's finale, with Alicent Hightower present as a witness, potentially in a heightened, symbolic role that echoes similar elements from the book, but still feeling engineered to center their fractured relationship as the emotional core of the entire series. In In Fire and Blood, Rhaenyra flees to Dragonstone as riots erupt in King's Landing. Dragged before her half-brother Aegon II, he feeds her to his dragon Sunfire, while her son Aegon the Younger is forced to watch. The show has laid extensive groundwork to make this moment not just a political execution, but a satisfying arc for Rhaenyra and Alicent's core relationship, leading me to believe that Alicent will be in the room present to watch Rhaenyra's execution. Yet, if it ends with Rhaenyra dying in front of Alicent, following by the Green's attempted victory and the eventual extinction of the dragons, many viewers will be left asking themselves, what was this all for? This mirrors the biggest criticism of Game of Thrones Season 8, another queen with a legitimate claim, Daenerys, dying at the hands of or because of another Aegon.
We can't hide behind small mercies. The world we need won't be built by men loyal to the world we have.
The world we need is a world of mercy. It has to be.
And it will be. It's not easy to see something that's never been before.
Allowing the same criticisms to bleed into House of the Dragon. The parallel will be hard to ignore and will likely draw harsh complaints. Furthermore, the series has shown little interest in evolving or resolving the long-term consequences. There will be likely no strong or repercussions when it comes to Aegon's miserable reign and downfall. The survival of Rhaenyra's line through Aegon the Younger, who becomes Aegon III, and eventual connection to Daenerys Targaryen centuries later feels unexplored. The series has barely hinted at this larger legacy, despite making Aegon's dream, the prophecy, a central motif. Many of the show's earlier changes, softening Rhaenyra's ruthlessness, protects her image by removing or altering key characters like Nettles, and keeping Alicent relatively sympathetic has boxed the writers into a corner. They have made it difficult to portray Rhaenyra's full descent into paranoia and tyranny without alienating the audience. As a result, her death may land as tragic, but strangely muted, robbed of the earned moral weight presented in Fire and Blood. Ryan Condon and Sarah Hess have repeatedly framed the story centered on these two women crushed by the patriarchy. In the end, simply watching one queen die horrifically in front of the other will have little broader concepts of legacy, power, or the cycle of repeated violence, and the thematic promise will never truly feel fulfilled. Anyways, that's all I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Watchers Beyond the Wall, I am out.